Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. I'm the Director of Nursing at the Hillingdon Hospitals. My name is Melanie van den Borg, and I'd like to introduce this patient story to you this morning. And this covers over a couple of organisations in North West London and concerns a patient that was cared for and discharged from some of our hospitals. And this will cover admission to London North West, the Norfolk Park site, onto the Hillingdon site, and also through CNWL. Which are our partners in Central and North West London. So I'd really like to introduce Graham, who's the patient who's kindly given his time to be filmed about his experience over several of our hospitals. And I thank you for his time and the patient experience team that spent time with him. And we've got some learning that will be shared throughout the organisations, but actually this is a positive story. There are some things to pick up. And I think let's just go ahead now with this film. Thank you very much. If you can let the film roll, please.
I'm Graham Heisman. I'm 69 years old and been a diabetic for 23 years. I'm currently recovering in the Hawthorne unit, part of Woodland Centre in the grounds of Hillingdon Hospital. I was admitted to hospital in early December by an emergency ambulance following feeling unwell through infection caused by a diabetic foot ulcer, which had turned to osteomyelitis and made the foot non-viable. My only options were either palliative care or having an amputation. I opted for the amputation and I was admitted after leaving A&E through AMU into Bevan ward. During my time at Bevan, I asked if I could possibly go home for Christmas, so they attempted to let me go home. So I was taken home by the transport with a plaster cast on my right leg and went home. Unfortunately, it didn't work out. I ended up being admitted by another emergency ambulance the following morning, down to the fact that I could not cope with being indoors. I then was admitted to AMU briefly, and then into Franklin Ward, and then got transferred to Drayton Ward because of the problem with the building in Franklin. I then stayed in Franklin Ward, which is now Drayton Ward, until early January, when I was due to go to Northwick Park for an assessment prior to my operation. The plan was for me to return to Hillingdon, but that didn't happen because I was taken ill on the way to Northwick Park, and Northwick Park retained me there by A&E. I then stayed there until the amputation on the 10th of January. Then from there, I remained at Northwick Park until I was transferred back to Hillingdon. I've worked with the surgeon and Dr. Mitchell at Hillingdon to get me back to Bevan ward. I was in Bevan ward for a couple of weeks, probably a little bit more, recovering, while the plans were here to get me here to Hawthorne. I then was transferred by patient transport here to Hawthorne without any problems. Everything was ready for me. And since then, I've been doing everything required to do what is needed. During my time at Hillingdon, the second time when I came back from Northwick Park, I worked intensively with the physiotherapy department at the gym Monday to Friday, either at the gym or in my room, using the wheelchair and strengthening my body to prepare me for hopefully a prosthetic limb in the future. When I came to Hawthorne, the physiotherapy wasn't quite as intensive, but I knew enough to do my own exercises and do my own thing, working with the physio team here and the occupational therapy team here. I'm currently now waiting for certain work to be done in my house to enable me to return home, which will hopefully be within the next 2 weeks. Overall, my spells in either Hillingdon or Northwick Park Hospital have been very good. Hillingdon in particular was very helpful and friendly. The staff were great, particularly in Bevan Ward, where they should be totally commended, and also the staff in Hawthorne do a grand job, make you feel very comfortable, make you feel welcome, but most of all, make you feel at home and preparing you ready to go home.
Thank you very much. It's great to hear. So just to have a couple of extra questions I'd like to ask you. Before you transferred over here, did you actually receive any discharge booklets?
When I came from Bevan to here, no, I did not. But I did have discharge documents sent to my house when I went from Norfolk Park to Bevan.
Okay, thank you. And were your family or next of kin aware of your transfer to the Hawthorn unit?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. And did you go to the departure lounge before you arrived here? And if so, what was your experience in the...
No. When I transferred from Bevan to here, I did not go to the discharge lounge at all. But I did have an issue when I was at Hawthorn in the early days. I had a chest pains. I was then taken by emergency ambulance to A&E, went through the A&E procedure and through AMU when it was all okay. Then I went to the discharge lounge and that was quite smooth. A couple of hours and I was back in Hawthorn.
Okay. And was the Hawthorn unit ready for you when you transferred across in terms of any medication you needed or any equipment you needed?
With regards to medication, I brought medication with me, so they had all they needed to do, and they had all the instruction needed from Bevan to deal with me immediately, and that went on. That's been smooth ever since.
Okay, thank you. And how did you transfer from Hillingdon Hospital to Hawthorn units?
Again, it was patient transport, the HAT service
Okay.
brought me here, and that was absolutely no problem whatsoever.
And finally, can I just ask, what did Hillingdon Hospital do well during your stay? Have you got any examples you'd like to share?
Most of all, it was friendliness and encouraging me to be positive, because obviously when I first was in Hillingdon, I was in not very well, to be very honest. And so basically they saved my life in a way by keeping me cheerful, keeping me positive. The staff were very good. It was great. Yeah, any care I got from doctors, consultants, could not fault it. Medication was there when I needed it. It encouraged me. When I came back, it went to a different level, because all of a sudden my life had been changed forever because I'd had the amputation. And the care I got the second time now was even better, because then they're dealing with a specific situation rather than a potential situation. So again, the staff are really friendly, really helpful. The physio team were great, can't fault those at all. The pharmacy kept to inform what was going on. If I had any criticism of pharmacy, sometimes they're a little bit slow getting the medication together for you when you are being discharged or moved. On this occasion, it was all ready for me in advance, if they knew I was going.
Okay.
So,
and what could Hillingdon Hospital have done to improve your experience?
The only criticism I got of Hillingdon Hospital, and I appreciate budgets and things come into it, is the food choice or the food method is not the best in the world. And I do think, being diabetic, I have to have specific needs and specific requirements. So breakfast at 8 o'clock is fine, got no problem with that. I'd like to see lunch a little bit later, so it balances my day out properly, and supper a little bit later, because I again find that the times they have the meals, I need to have something between 8 and 9 at night to make sure I don't have low sugar in the morning. I'd rather not do that. I'd rather have that. So other than that, it's not bad. Other than the little plastic cups they give you in the main hospital aren't very nice. Northwick Park use mugs. ICU here at Hawthorn, they use plastic mugs, which I'd appreciate for better. And also, it's something that 3 years old would be better environmentally than having throwaway plastic cups.
Okay, so that's it, Graham. So thank you, Graham, very much for sharing your story.
Absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
The rural placement units with the birds is black red.
Yeah, I assume that we now have cockatoos on our wards. Those great. Melanie, do you want to just tell us what the takeaway stories from there that the board wants to come? And then I'm going to turn to Leslie and ask us to give her a bit of a bigger picture.
Yes, thank you. I think looking at a patient as an individual in terms of diabetic care, I think we tried to work a system around being able to work for the organisation. I think we need to think about diabetic patients do need to space their blood sugar out during the day, and that it was a really important takeaway. And I've certainly picked that up with our housekeeping team, and how we can make that easier for patients to serve diabetic patients, if they would like this, to be served last in the meal service, so they've got a longer time to keep their blood sugar constant. We've talked about the plastic cups versus the mugs, and actually it's quite interesting. Some patients don't like to have a mug because they can't lift it when it's got all of the drink inside it. It's got a hot drink. So at the moment, our meal service is actually reviewing the type of cup we use. That's not based on what Graham's just said, but really generally we're having a review of that. But it's quite interesting. The takeaway message is not one size doesn't fit all. Even if you think about a cup or a mug or a meal time, certainly in terms of the flexibility of the meal time, that can be changed. And that's really highlighted that to me. We really need to think about the patient in that. And obviously for Graham and patients like Graham, there are snack boxes and other snacks that are available, other food that's available to eat in between times. And it's really important that we work with patients and with dietitians and all the staff to make sure that we take all of that into consideration.
Brilliant, thank you. And thank you for your voice off camera. We said there's a second career for you when you get that up in nursing. Leslie, you're masterminding the discharge strategy across the whole of the NHS.
Well, thank you for that. I feel not going quite as well as it should, but I got the message, which is we need to do a little bit better. So I'm Leslie Watts, Chief Executive at Chelsea Westminster, and as Chairman says, the NHS discharge lead. So the reason that discharge and the flow of our patients to hospital are important, well, first and foremost, and just listening to Graham, is what you want is for patients to be in the most therapeutic setting. And in terms of recovery, what we want is for them to have time for recovery, and to have things like the physio, OT, and all of those things around them. But actually, the other reason that we want flow and discharge happening in our hospital is so that in our acute units are only patients that need to be in our acute units. So those patients, and that allows the acute units to service the front door, so the emergency, and also the elective recovery programme. And we know, and we'll hear as today goes on, that there are many challenges to the recovery of the elective programme. So it's really important that we only have hospital patients in our acute hospitals that need to be there. And actually, when I was listening to Graham, one of the things that I heard where he's having his recovery now was he needs some alterations in his home, and that's another 2 weeks. And there's a message in there that says, when do we start preparing for discharge? When do we start having those conversations? And that should be at the beginning of their stay in hospital. Not really when he's more or less ready to go now, and actually we're going to make those alterations. So there's a lot of work going on to systematically plan for the discharge of patients, either before they even come into hospital, or certainly at the beginning of their stay if they're an emergency admission, and ensuring that we have everything in place. So how do we get our doctors to write up tablets for discharge as early as possible? How do we make sure the tests that the patients need doing are done as quickly as and as efficiently as possible? How do we get patients into the discharge line so we can get the next patient into the cloud and keep that? All of that work is going on. And there was a little capture there with Graham that says there's still more to do. That would be the case right through every hospital that we're sitting and going to be talking about today, but actually nationally as well. At the moment, there's between 12 and 13,000 patients nationally with no criteria to reside in our acute units, and those are beds that we should be using to treat patients that are sitting on a waiting list, or to more efficiently get patients out of our emergency departments and into a bed.
Thank you. That's it. And for that, there's about 100,000 beds across the NHS as a whole, isn't there? That's more than 10% of our beds. About 13%. Yeah. Good waving. Well done.
Just a couple of questions, really. One is around, I think, really good point about planning before they come in, but it is almost impossible for some sort of work with people and tried to do that, made countless phone calls. And how do we as a system make that easier for patients to do when they want to do it, you know, and who, maybe it's a question for the, you know, ICS, but that's the first one. And then the second one is about the discharge when the care package is more than they had before they came in, but the patient's saying, I'll manage. And how do we make that more patient-led in terms of if they're saying they'll manage, you know, versus safety? Because I think sometimes we ask that we're giving them, it's almost impossible to achieve.
So thank you. So in terms of the first question, I just think we need to be, for particular procedures, absolutely for elective care, to just be a bit more systematic about it, and allow patients to plan for relatives being there, all of those sorts of things. In terms of the packages of care, so one of the things that we do know is that we overprescribe care, and we're really very cautious about discharge. And so there is something that says, actually there was a piece of work done that looked at, I think, about 10,000 discharges, and 50% of the prescriptions were inaccurate. 92% of those overprescribed. So it isn't that actually we're putting patients in danger, we're actually overprescribing. And that means that less patients then can go home because we've got less resource to look after other patients, all of those sorts of things. So there's a lot of work going on that says, how do we, without being reckless, encourage people to take a little bit more risk about discharging patients and letting them manage at home? We know that they can manage much better in their home environment. They know where everything is. They can feel their way around much more than when they're in a hospital. So it's all that sort of approach. But that's a cultural change, and cultural change actually takes longer than the sort of transactional work that we can do quite easily.
Thank you. Yeah.
I was interested to take us back to the sort of start of the patient journey there as well, because it sounds like there was some coordination between Northwick Park and Hillingdon around the operation planning. And I think that's something we need to concentrate as a collaborative as well, because sometimes you do find patients may be delayed in one centre before going to another. That's an area that we ought to concentrate on as well.
Last point, Mary, do you want to wind us up? Thank you.
Thank you. That was all really, really helpful. I think some points made out, and I'm sorry I didn't pull some of those discharge points out, but what I would like to highlight is there's a booklet that North West London has produced for patients being discharged that's available to all our organisations as well. So for patients, this is really quite informative in terms of discharge. So that's something I really wanted just to add on to the end of that. It's really important that patients have information about discharge, because we know quite a bit, but this helps patients. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. If you could pass our thanks back to Graham, that was very kind of him to pass it down, and very informative. And I think just in the discussion we had, we shouldn't forget that he was delighted with the care that he's received from both of our two hospitals. And I like to feel, but my contribution to this group is that we focused on the problems that we need to solve. But we should also remember that actually that was a patient that we've done a great job for, and there are things we still have to learn and take away. It's really important points, but I think well done to the staff who cared for him in both hospitals. Moving on to reports, and firstly my report, which people have got in writing and is on the website, so I'm not going to walk people through. I just wanted to pull out a couple of points from the first part of my report. This is my anniversary of chair. I haven't seen the biscuit with chocolate cake, but this is my anniversary of chair of this board. I joined in April last year, and this is about 6 months since we came together into a single board in common. I think this is our third board in common, and I think it's just worth noting how far we've come in a year, and we will see some of this. And as we go to the board, of course, we will spend our time focusing on the hardest stuff and the problems. And I think it is just worth a moment to reflect on. Firstly, that all of our trusts are going to come in at the end of for the end of last year, having delivered their financial plans. That is a slight historic novelty for North West London as a whole, so that we shouldn't underestimate the achievement that is, and for most of the public who read the newspapers, that is not a common thing across the NHS as a whole. So I think congratulations to the teams who delivered that. And slightly embarrassingly, we were held up at the where the chairs were called in by the NHS England's chair and finance director last week, last week for I think it was called a call to arms, and we were held up as an example of good practice in terms of the improvements. And now we get bullied in the playground. But it wasn't just about the money. The increase in the elective activity that we have done, adjusted for the complexity of what we're doing, is maybe the largest increase in the country. It's certainly the largest increase in London, and very significant upturn compared to where we were pre-COVID. We're now doing adjusted cases adjusted across the patch very significantly, which is good news for patients in terms of operations. We've improved our A&E performance pretty much across the board, and some of our trusts are amongst the best in the country, both in A&E performance and in ambulance handovers. And our journey to make all of our trusts like that, I think, goes on. The measurements of quality show that we are still, as measured by in-hospital mortality, the safest collection of hospitals to be treated as an inpatient in the country. And that gives us a whole lot of work, opportunity to continue to spread best practice and continue on our quest to deliver the best hospital system in the country. I think that we can see that journey accelerating. And as we will talk about in business cases going on, our ability to plan jointly around capital and the like has also improved very significantly. So to my thanks to the board, but also to your teams who've gone and delivered, I think, a tremendous year under an awful lot of very difficult circumstances. We all know the NHS is somewhere away from where we would like it to be and where we were 10 years, but under the current circumstances, I think it's an extremely impressive performance. So thank you for that. And then the last thing I'd just like to draw attention to is that we have 3 NEDs. We had Vineta left us at the last meeting. Nilkens, this is his final meeting, and Peter, we have 1 more meeting from, but we have a turnover amongst our NEDs, and we interviewed yesterday, and I can't say in public who we're going to appoint, because we have a process to go through with our councils of governors and with NHS England. But the good news is we have exceptionally high calibre collection of applicants. We could have filled the posts several times over, and we have made offers to three new NEDs, all verbally accepted, subject to the approvals we have to go through. I'm delighted by that, and they will phase in over the next couple of meetings to take up the vacancies as they come up. And my thanks to Janet Rubin, who masterminded the recruitment process for us. Thank you for that. It was, I think, a significant note about where the collaborative is landing in people's mindsets, that we've got such a large number of extremely high caliber candidates, and we're interviewing later on this week for the medical director at Hillingdon, and again we've got exceptionally high quality candidates, and the opportunity of working within the collaborative as well as at Hillingdon is part of why people are going to handling. So I'm really pleased about that. So, thank you very much. I'm going to move on to the Chief Executive's report and turn to Leslie first.
I think covered many of the highlights actually. I'll just spend a couple of seconds on industrial action, which of course, again, we've just finished, and just to pay tribute to everybody that worked during that period of time and kept services going. Of course, the impact of that, I was having a look across North West London, so over 12,500 patients cancelled due to industrial action. So we were working the vast majority of those outpatients, we will work very hard to recover that position again, because we are and have been working as a collaborative to get ourselves to the best position we possibly can in terms of treating as many patients as possible. You'll see documented in here some innovative work that we've been trying around the emergency pathway, working with our ED consultants and our A&E consultants to try and join that up and again make that as productive as possible. Along with my chief exec colleagues, have been having our appraisals in the last few weeks, or for those who haven't had it, in the next couple of weeks. And actually, that allowed us to think about not just the work that's happened in the last year, but really where we want to concentrate some effort. So obviously recovery, and by that recovery of quality as well as operational performance, as well as the money. But a lot of discussion actually about our workforce and the well-being of our workforce formed a good deal of that discussion. And you'll see in here that, again, we will renew our efforts around that inclusivity, the equality agenda, our intention. There's other stuff in there, but I have to take in. Thank you.
I think what I'll do is I'll ask the 4 chief executives and then I'll come for questions. Otherwise, you'll collect everybody's questions.
Thanks very much. So yes, there will be quite a lot of repetition, so I'll try not to make too much of it. So I think just to reiterate what Leslie said about industrial action, we unfortunately also have, I think we're the only trust in North West London who have had the nurses who have been taking industrial action, and of course will be taking industrial action on the last 2 days of their mandate in a couple of weeks' time, which we are planning for. I mean, I do think it's important to remember the point that Leslie made about the cancellations. I think our staff have done an absolutely amazing job at keeping patients safe when they were in hospital during the industrial action. But in some respects, that's a question of people who were in hospital when the music stopped, and we happened to be looking after, got actually really good care of people who turned up those days, got really good care. And I think there's some really interesting lessons to learn about having consultant staff absolutely in our emergency pathways. But actually, there were an awful lot of people who needed care that week or had care planned that didn't get it. And that goes for every single bit of industrial action. And it's much more difficult to get visibility of that. And I do think it's a really important point just to highlight. Just in terms of the rest of our report, so I think, you know, I'm really grateful to all of our staff, but actually particularly to our clinical leaders, managers, and who have had to plan. It's taken an enormous amount of planning, and actually the key task for us is to not let our workforce fragment in what can be a very difficult and emotive time. And I think overall they have done an incredibly good job, and it has been at times extremely difficult. You'll see a few things that will come up in actually the quality things that we're working on. I'm concerned about bloodstream infections actually across the whole of the collaborative. We do need to do more work around getting back, particularly actually around the really important basics around hand hygiene. I think that's very important. In sort of contrast to some of the sort of slightly downy things, as I've got some uppy things which I'd like to mention. We were really pleased actually with the progress in the National Staff Survey. So we have spent most of the last 4 years really focusing on trying to make the organisation a better, more inclusive place to work. It was great to see 7,500 people, or over 7,500 people respond to the staff survey, and we saw increases in the theme for compassionate and inclusive. We're now above average of 5 out of 9 categories. That's up from 1 out of 9 last year. Sorry, 3 out of 9 last year. And we've had significant improvements in scores around the organisation fit to work and feeling that promotion was on the basis of fairness, which I think is good. It is worth pointing out, I think, that the job is far from done. We have, if you go from really bad to only quite bad, there's still. So I think it's really encouraging progress, but there's remains a huge amount to do. It was really good to see, however, the estates and facilities staff, particularly the facility staff who we in-housed in 2020, just as the pandemic started, with fantastic response rate, over 650 out of 1,000 staff responded, and they had an engagement score of 7.7, which is an extraordinarily high score, and they had really good scores for morale. So I think, as we look back on what was quite a difficult time at that point, where we in-housed them clearly. I'd just like to thank Professor Katie Urchin, who has gone to become the Chief Medical Officer for University Hospitals for Sussex, who was our Divisional Director of Surgery and Cancer for a long period of time. You'll see a whole range of stuff that we have done around EDI, which I think is important, and some very interesting stuff around research innovation. So the Patient Safety Research Centre has been refunded for another 5 years, which is excellent. We've got back up to recruitment levels for an NIHR portfolio study, which is also good. We're waiting to hear about how the what are now called regional research delivery networks, which used to be these CRNs, the comprehensive research networks, are going to be changed. So they've changed all the boundaries, and we've gone in with Barts Health to try and safeguard the research that's under that portfolio. We've got in the report, you'll just note some interesting research publications that have come out. A really interesting one, I think, just to note from the BRC about using loyalty card data to help spot patients who might have the symptoms of COVID, which I think is a really, I think the opportunity to use some of the vast amounts of data to collect it in everything that we do, I think there's a really interesting set of avenues. We know, for example, that 70% of people Google their symptoms before they attend an emergency department. So I think there's some, those sorts of things that offer some real opportunities. And great to see a number of our senior investigators getting the senior investigator status with the NIHR. So Adnan Kustovic, who's our Professor of Paediatric Allergy, Toby Gordon, who's Professor of Critical Care and did a lot around repair during the pandemic. Simon Sextina is Professor of Primary Care. And we had reappointed Professor Mark Thurs, who's the Director of our BRC, Matt Gordon, and Alison Holmes, who's a Professor of Infectious Diseases. Final things to say, redevelopment. Sat here for many, many years talking about proposed redevelopment of Imperial, and here we are. So all 3 sites remain in the new hospitals programme. We were expecting an announcement shortly before the budget, then we were expecting an announcement shortly after the budget. Now we're just hoping for an announcement anytime. But I'm hoping that will come. We continue to work with our redevelopment team. We've got really good plans, and I think there has been some progress. On the upside, in terms of redevelopment, the Western Eye Hospital will be ready to fully reopen in June, and we'll have an additional operating theatre, so that will help us to motor through some more of the backlog in ophthalmology, which is very good. I would particularly like to thank the team at the Western Eye. They got kicked out of the building under difficult circumstances when there were significant fire risk, and they were back up to operating at pre-pandemic levels within about 4 months, working out of a mobile operating theatre at Charing Cross, which I think is a real achievement. And finally, really pleasing, Caris Barton, one of our consultants in heart failure, run a Royal Award for the Pumping Marvellous Foundation, which is a great name for any founder. Services, and that's on top of the HSJ awards that the Community Heart Service won last year. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you. So our policy is so with just a huge thank you to staff. It's a great way to book consultant meeting. You walk into A&E and you find all your consultants. It's quite handy. But you know, the morale was fantastic. Went above and beyond, not just medical staff, the nursing staff, the AHP staff that actually really filled a lot of these shifts. But a huge thank you to the admin staff. They had a difficult job of thousands of patients telling them their procedures or operations have been delayed, and that's a big task. They've done it twice over now. And so it really does impact everybody in the organisation. Echo what Leslie and Tim said, the hospitals are very safe. We've got some interest. That's 14% less use of radiology from A&E and CT scans. Pathology. So, you know, there are some things we can just on a separate note, so the strategy is now launched. We brought it here at the last meeting.
both staff members, community members of our populations contributed to this strategy. We launched on all 3 sites with our partners. So we had Ketton Chef launched with Central Middlesex with us. We had Nena, who's the Borough Lead for Ealing, launching at Ealing with us, and Lisa Henderson at Norfolk Park. Really positive. The comms team have done a fantastic job with lots of media that's socialising around the organisation, keeping us live for us. And we've got a very clear vision now for the next 5 years. Another few things that we've done, so virtual wards are really starting to come to life now at London North West. So we've now got 5 virtual wards that pretty much have about 4 wards worth of patients that are now being treated at home every single day, which is fantastic. So they are running in heart failure, respiratory, infectious disease and diabetes. And we've just had the National NHSE team in doing a filming from London North West promoting the virtual wards. We've got 2 more virtual wards about to go live. The one that we're really excited about is end of life care. When you look at the number of patients that don't die in their chosen phase of death, usually because of a slight panic or medical emergency at the end, last phases of their life is significant, and we think we can keep them at home by using virtual wards at end of life care. So that's another one that we're excited. The other thing that we've launched, so one of our Darzi clinical fellows has been a fantastic job. She's a GP by background. She's been working with our paediatric team to look at how we can avoid children in our A&E department in mental health, not crisis, but pre-crisis situations. And we've launched a youth body system now. So every child that comes to A&E with a lower level mental health need has a youth body allocated to them. The youth bodies all have clinical contact with one of our paediatricians 24 hours a day. And it's really helped avoid readmission to A&E. NHS England are now using this as a pilot study and have funded us now to run this for another 2 years, so we can look at how we can expand that across the organisation, which is a really exciting project. I'll just quickly touch on urgent care. So as you know, since the last meeting, London North West and Hillingdon took over the running of the urgent care centres. So for us on 3 of our sites, we've got urgent care centres, and for Hillingdon, one of their sites. That's happened very smoothly, a very quick transition, and the team have done an amazing job actually of taking over the running of that, but actually increasing the performance in all 3 of our urgent care centres, which has been fantastic and really nice to align them now with our A&E pathways. I think the last thing I'd just say is the work we've done around our anchor institutions. So we had a meeting, Tracy and Simon met with the Citizens UK team around the London Living Wage and how we really promote the London Living Wage within our organisation for all of our contracted and substantive staff, so similar to where Imperial have got to. And now we're working with all of our higher education institutions in our boroughs to look at how we directly employ frontline colleges. So that's been a really positive piece of work as well. We've had 2 inspections. We've had one from Health Education England, dive on our obstetric and gynecology pathway, looking at the experience of all learners within that pathway. They saw significant improvement and have removed all enhanced monitoring, which is really positive. And we were delighted to be awarded with the NHS Pastoral Care Quality Award in recognition for the international recruitment and the great team work that team do in supporting our international recruits when they come to the country and to continue with their careers within our organisation. So they're just some of the highlights that you've got the full report there for you.
Perfect, thanks, Patricia.
Thank you. So I feel like someone who's at a conference where you do feedback on sessions and you're the last person and everybody said everything you wanted to say. So I want to reiterate my thanks to staff. In fact, I did a blog yesterday which went out in our e-newsletter, just thanking staff for the work they did during the strikes. Unlike Imperial, we haven't had nurses strikes, but we've had now 2 junior doctor strikes. And I have to say staff, despite differences in opinion about whether staff should be striking and how it should be handled, have been absolutely amazing. And like Pippa, I think that we've got a lot to learn from the way we run the hospital and what that looks like, particularly in a small to medium-sized organisation. So very positive things out of that. But I'm absolutely with Leslie that driving to work last week, I felt confident that we could provide safe care. I felt very sad for those patients who'd had care cancelled. And in some cases, have been cancelled several times. Having said that, I am really proud to report that we had planned to have no patients waiting over 78 weeks by the end of March. In fact, we had 6 patients waiting over 78 weeks, and those were all patients who chose not to be operated on or to have treatment through patient choice. So despite the strikes, we did incredibly well on that. And a huge thank you to Tina and Eamon and the team who worked really hard. I mean, they were literally
phoning patients on a daily basis, trying to persuade them that they should come and have care. So that's a really good place to be as we move into this next financial year. In terms of informing the board, I think everybody is probably aware that for the last 18 months, we have been in National Oversight Framework Category 4, which means that we've been working with the National Intensive Support Team around particularly our financial position and making sure that we have a financially sustainable organisation, but very much linked with that, what our operational performance looks like, what that means in terms of our workforce, and particularly making sure that we don't concentrate so much on finance that we lose sight of quality of care. I'm pleased to say that we had our third oversight meeting with the national team on the 3rd of April. The feedback we got from that meeting was that they could absolutely see that we've made really good progress on all of the exit criteria that were monitored against. The decision was made that they wanted to see another quarter's worth of progress, particularly in terms of making sure that we were managing our run rate well. And we will have another follow-up meeting at the beginning of July to talk to them about that. So really positive decision. I don't know if you want to say any more about that, Matthew.
I'd like to open up some questions and comments.
Oh, sorry, I'm not quite finished.
Oh, no, finish.
So just a few other things I wanted to highlight. I think, Matthew, you've already highlighted the issue with our redevelopment programme. Like Tim, we're waiting to hear the outcome for the next stage, but some really positive action in this last quarter in that we got planning permission agreed for the new hospital redevelopment, and we are very much in a position that should we get the go-ahead phase of the work, we're ready to get moving on that. Our staff survey results, I know people have picked up that on our report in the HSJ, we continued for second year to be the lowest in London in terms of staff filling that they would recommend the trust as a place to work. I have to say that doesn't reflect what we hear on the ground in terms of it being a friendly place to work. What I can say is that we have stabilised the position. We had a significant downturn in our staff engagement from 2016 to 2020. And we've seen a stabilisation of that over the last 2 years. But I'm absolutely with him, although I think we've held our position in most of the indicators. We would like to be, and there's a lot of work going on about how we reverse that trend and start to see that improve over the next few years. We did say goodbye to Melanie at our last board meeting because she was due to finish with us at the end of March. I'm happy to say we managed to persuade Rob that he would let us stay with us for another month, which has been really helpful. Melanie will leave us at the end of this month and will be replaced by Sarah Burton, who joins us on the 1st of May. And I'm also sad to say that I think since we last met, sad but very pleased for Gooby, that she's been appointed as the Chief Executive of the Evelina Hospital in London, which is, of course, she got all that experience while she's been at Hillingdon, I will say. And so I'd like to thank Melanie and Gooby for the contribution they've made to Hillingdon Hospital over the last 2.5 years, and we will greatly miss them. And as Matthew said, we've got a good pool of candidates for the interview for Medical Director this Friday. And then I just want to finally note that we appointed Ian Bendel as the lead governor for the Trust. He commenced with us at the beginning of April, and a huge thanks to Tony Ellis, who had been lead governor for 12 years. And we had a very nice thank you to him. And then just in terms of recognition and celebrating success, and I just wanted to pull two things out. Adam Tocock, who is our lead librarian, and I was talking to somebody yesterday who said, oh gosh, I didn't know hospitals had librarians anymore. But we've got somebody who has really upped the work we've done around digital librarianship and supporting our junior staff in being able to do research. And final thing to say is that we have won another award, producer of the Year award, and it just adds to a number of really good pieces of work we've done around sustainability in the organisation. So thank you to staff for that.
Thank you. I take some questions, comments. Steve. Thank you. I'm Steve Gill. I'm the Vice Chair at Churchill West and also an at Hillingdon. So I had a question on the, Leslie, I think you said there were 12,000 appointments that were cancelled. Patricia referred to the fact that we were aiming collectively for 78-week waits. So I wonder if you could comment on a couple of things. It could be any of the four of you. What's been the impact on the overall waiting list? Obviously, it's gone up. The impact on the 78-week wait, and perhaps more importantly, the impact on cancer patients, where we clearly had to make some very difficult choices around how we were going to treat people in this period. I'll pick that up.
Yeah. So thank you. In terms of the waiting, so those patients obviously haven't come off the waiting list, but I think it's probably, I was going to cover it in the integrated performance strategy, but I don't know if the board could, like, just literally in 1 or 2 sentences, just say the impact of your interest, if that's okay.
Hi, I'm Rob Portuguese at Johnson Westminster. So the impact for 78 weeks was fairly small because the numbers are small anyway. So we ended the year at 31 at Chelsea. Which isn't where we wanted to be, but we're all committed for 4 of us to get to 0 by the end of April, notwithstanding patient choice. In terms of cancer, very specifically, unlike the first wave, we did have to stand down more elective operating in the second wave of strikes. It was much more prolonged, but where possible, we kept activity going, particularly 2-week wait referrals, particularly using our CNSs to see patients so that we could continue with 2-week wait cancer appointments where possible. I don't know if my colleagues want to add anything.
I would echo exactly what Rob said. So in terms of 78-week waits, the impact is small because the number of patients waiting was small. I am concerned about the impact for our cancer patients. We are tracking each of those patients that we have to cancel for the strike individually, and we've made sure that we've got a treatment plan for all of them. So I'm not expecting a huge impact in terms of number for our overall performance numbers, but certainly for those patients, we're very focused on making sure that we get them in as soon as possible.
Very similar at London North West. Hello everyone, I'm James Walters, the COO. We finished the year with 33 78-week waits and give absolutely the same priority, tracking and expediency to both the diagnostics and the treatment plans for cancer patients as much as we possibly can.
So for Hillingdon, we've got 35 in our April cohort of 78-week waits, so small numbers. We are planning to get all those patients treated by the end of April. As Rob said, notwithstanding patient choice. I'm actually much more worried about the 2-week wait patients because we did have to cancel a lot of 2-week wait clinics. And we can see that in our 2-week wait performance at Hillingdon. We did try and keep as much operating for significant cases as did the others. But I think 2-week waits, we will see the impact of that in the coming month.
Thank you very much. AJ. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Just a similar vein, I was just thinking about the when you might see an analysis of the impact of the strike action. So in terms of the patients we are looking after, so in terms of major harm, severe harm, and perhaps even death. So when might we see something around that? Thank you.
So thank you. So we're not expecting to see those sort of catastrophic outcomes, but we will look at every patient, particularly the 2-week wait, who went over a period of time. So all of those patients will be looked at. I don't know, Roger, if you want to say something about the process for that. But I mean, every week the chief operating officers we look at the increase to waiting list and the increase to waiting list by specialty and indeed by 2-week wait or others waiting.
Thank you. We've of course got a clinical governance system which is very robust in each of the organisations, which we would expect will identify for us any patients that do have any harm of whatever level, and we'll be making sure that that does pick up any of those cases. I would say that this has got a potentially long tail because patients have got long pathways which haven't necessarily started or have been hindered, so we will need to keep a close eye on this for some time. Over and above that, we have a clinical prioritisation process that we run for our admitted the organisations, keeping a close eye on that, making sure that they can
the risk department, which allows for reprioritisation.
Thank you. I'll take two more questions, David and then Simon.
Thank you, Chair. And there is no doubt about it that the ability for the organisations to step up during crisis is phenomenal. And our thanks to everybody that's done that. I'm very curious, you all mentioned about during the now, particularly in the A&E departments, how things improved. And obviously one answer there is about senior consultants everywhere, which is impossible. But I'm just curious as to when will we be able to share the learnings that have come out of that, dare I say, improved performance in A&E during the short.
I think we would plan to tag that on to the peer reviews that we've been doing of the emergency department. So I don't think it will take a huge amount of time, but I do think we need to be quite analytical about it. And one of the things we need to do is to really focus on, I think, understanding each part of the pathway. I mean, I think one of the interesting things, if you look across our emergency departments, is patients across the board spend longer in our emergency. Interesting is that if you look at the different patients spend different amounts of time in different parts of the pathways. I think there's quite a lot to learn about that. And I think that, as you say, problem with not training any junior doctors and just having consultants at the front door is, of course, in 10 years' time you don't have any consultants because you haven't trained any. So we've got to get the balance right of making sure that we are training our juniors and giving them the opportunities whilst trying to keep them ahead. And having just we should be very analytical about something. I'm just going to sort of, so yeah, I suspect that there will be a lot of focus front door and the seniority of the person that makes that, because I think getting patients into the right pathway is probably the absolute key.
Thank you. Dr. Simon.
Simon Morris, NED, London, North West and Hillingdon. It's maybe too early to ask this question, but given the news that the strikes look like they're going to continue for the rest of the year, I'm interested in what planning we're doing or thinking of doing, both in terms of pushing the information up about what's going on and the impact on patients. Secondly, the sustainability of the staff working so hard, conscious that, staff are an important asset and how we're going to keep staff going. And thirdly, what, as we as a collaborative can do to sort of make the noise that this isn't a sustainable situation.
So I'm going to ask Viv to say something about staff in a minute, but be under no concern that we don't talk about these things, both at regional and national level. We absolutely do, and there's a real balance here between being very clear about the impact in terms of numbers and getting involved one way or another in terms of the rights and wrongs of what individuals do. It's a tricky old thing, frankly. But we do absolutely. In fact, there's a sit rep that goes up during every day of the strike that says impact, and there are discussions. There's a meeting for all of us in London on Wednesday, which is the NHS leadership meeting, which all chief execs will be at. And of course, this will be an issue. But the other bit I would say is, and I think it was Tim who described the amount of planning that goes in, both in terms of how we minimise the impact on patients, although it's you've just heard the numbers, it's regrettable, but actually how we make best use of staff, but also support those staff during these times. And then, just as importantly, the amount go on, or once we come out of industrial action, to try and recover that position. In some ways, it's even more difficult actually to keep people going during that period of time. So it's a bit about acknowledging that and liking about taking that. Want to say something about it?
No, I mean, I think that's absolutely the right challenge for all of us, Simon. I think this will become harder and harder. So, staff really, all staff have really worked together to make sure people have got their right to strike and keep patients safe. However, that will become harder and harder. I met 3 consultants yesterday who, quite frankly, looked exhausted because they'd worked nights all last week and then were operating yesterday into their normal schedule. And not being ageist, but as they all said to me, I'm too old for this. This is quite difficult, and asking them to do that again and again is going to become difficult. So, they will all rally around, and all of us will work hard to keep the morale up. But it will become more and more tedious, and we'll do all we can around staff wellbeing and supporting them. And we did that with food and refreshments, and made it as easy as possible for people to work in a different way. but this will become more of a challenge, particularly if they do align professional strikes. So if they align nursing and medical strikes, to be honest, getting my head around that is challenging right now.
Thank you very much. I think excellent discussion, and thanks for the questions and the answers. But we ask the board to note those reports. Noted. Thank you. We're going to move on now to the business, finance, and operational plans. 3 separate plans, which I think I'm going to turn to Leslie to introduce. Let's assume people have read the papers and move us into a conversation. But Leslie, can you guide us through this section?
Let me first start off by saying that I know Patricia has read them all, because we've definitely had her feedback, which was really helpful. So what I'd start, I'm going to hand this over, but I hope when you read these plans you see the amount of forensic work that's going into bringing them together, and the joint work across the collaborative, but across professional functions as well, that has gone on to bring these together. It's work in progress, so always more to do. But a big thank you and a well done, actually. I'm going to hand over, I think, to Jonathan, who will navigate us through these.
Thanks, Leslie. Hello everyone. I'm Jonathan Hill, the Chief Finance Officer at London North West. And I think it's, Leslie's right to say this is a work in progress, but it does mark a very significant achievement that across the 4 trusts we've been able to pull together a combined set of business, financial and operational plans. It's about £3.5 to £4 billion worth of expenditure. I know I should put finance first, but there's about 35,000 staff, so it's a really significant achievement. But as it's the first time we've done it, it's not quite there yet, and I think it'll be an iterative process. However, there's loads to be pleased about and to celebrate. Matthew, I'm conscious of time, so I was thinking that perhaps we just run through them all, if you like, and then have the discussion, if that's okay. So as I say, there's three documents, and they've been through a fairly rigorous scrutiny process at the Collaborative Finance and Performance Committee, which has been really helpful in terms of trying to put a bit more substantiation on it. The operating plan itself is very much driven by the national planning process, and I think, as I'll say in a minute or two, we've done a really good job collectively building an operating plan. It's also been tested by the ICB and by the regional processes, and I think, as Matthew alluded to, I think getting tremendously good feedback about the quality and the depth of the work that's gone into the operating plan. The financial plan has been a really challenging exercise. Actually, we reflected that as CFOs. Probably it's the area where there's been the least amount of collaboration in the same way that the COOs, the Chief People Officers and our clinical colleagues have been doing. So we had a lot to learn over the last quarter, but I think we've pulled together a really strong financial plan. And then the sort of strategic narrative and key priority projects or business plan, which I was probably wrongly shorthanded in. I think some of our priority pieces of work on for the next couple of years. So just looking first of all at the operating plan, I wasn't going to say a huge amount about it, other than to say it demonstrates compliance in a huge number of areas. 99% of the priorities that have been set by the national teams. I think when you read it, you might not necessarily see the scale of joint working that's had to go together, particularly from the COOs, but also from clinical colleagues and the chief, just to get to the results we've got there. So there's quite a few reds in terms of evaluated activity and so on, but we are actually submitting a plan that shows a real level of ambition, both to meet the access and performance targets, but also to deliver the really significant increase in activity that we need, both to provide for our patients in the coming year, but also to deliver on our financial plan. So it's a real testament to taking place through the COOs and through other colleagues. I wasn't going to say a huge amount more about the operating plan, but I was just going to offer the opportunity to Rob and see if he wanted to add anything.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. I'm not going to say much about it, other than just to sort of be remiss not to just to sort of reference the risks associated with delivery. And here we are 3 weeks into the financial year, and already we've heard from Leslie 12,500 patients cancelled. So we're going to be on the back foot from the get-go. Clearly, any further rounds of industrial action will have a huge impact. And also, we've got to be cognizant of new EPRs at 2 of our acute providers, which is always potential risk for delivery. I'm sure the planning then will make sure that that goes smoothly.
Thank you, Jonathan. You're coming back to you, Jonathan. You've got some time.
Thanks very much. So the operating plan, gone into the compliance in terms of the national process in terms of 30th of March. I think nationally there's a whole series of resubmissions taking place. I think for the ICB and particularly for the collaborative, we are fully compliant in that sense. We're delivering a balanced financial plan. And that leads me to the financial plan. And I was just going to ask Virginia to say a couple of words about where we're at.
Chief Financial Officer at HLS. Keep it brief at the moment, we're a bit short on time. As you already referred to, Matthew, we've submitted a break-even plan for the trust collaborative at the end of March. So it must be said that that is including some non-recurrent funding from ICB. So we've received £66 million of growth funding, which is the whole of the allocation has been allocated to our four trusts, and 45 million of non-recurrent support from the ICB to support the break-even plan. We have agreed, or we're in the process of agreeing a programme of work with the ICB to support the relief of that funding, including work that's been started on theatre productivity. And we've got a 3.4% cost improvement target to find, which is just under £120 million across the board. So a big ask to deliver our cost improvement programme. We've set ourselves the target of getting to 50% by the end of March. And then we've got an ambition to get to 100% by the end of May. The only other thing I would say is as Rob reiterates, there's a number of risks in the financial plan, the reference and the elective recovery fund, which Jonathan and Rob mentioned. There's also risk around inflation. As we know, there's been very high inflation over the last year, and obviously any ongoing industrial action causes a risk on our financial plan as well as our operating plan.
Thanks, Virginia. And of course, all Chief Finance Officers are available for lengthy and extensive discussions if you'd like further. So super briefly, I think Giles just wants to say a couple of words about the capital plan, and then I'll round off. Thank you.
John Jasper, I'm CFO of Imperial. And just in terms of capital, because that's obviously another key part of our financial plan, the plan is about £264 million for the collaborative. The majority of that £152 million is funded by trust-owned cash resources, with some other funding come from Central in relation to community diagnostic centres and endoscopy. And I think it's fair to say the themes about where the capital plan is spent are very consistent each year. So fire safety and new hospital builds, plant and machinery, equipment replacement tend to be the priority areas we invest that money. So I suppose I'm just trying to reassure the board that we don't normally have capacity to do other things outside of those core things, and that's a limiting factor I think we face every single year. Apart from that, I wasn't going to say anything.
Worth noting, as we've seen in some of the other business cases, that one of the real strengths about the collaborative has been our ability to access capital in a much more integrated way, being able to draw down for regional and national, and as Jazz alludes to work much more flexibly across the collaborative. So the operating plan and the financial plan are the more conventional plans that colleagues will be familiar with seeing. We then move on to the experimental theatre sort of plan, the slightly different one. But one I think is going to potentially be really exciting over the course of the coming year. So with the help of the Directors of Strategy and Directors of Transformation and the whole board in workshop and development days, we've started to articulate what a kind of strategic narrative for the collaborative would be, to describe how, in a bit more detail, how we will work together over the next year or two as a collaborative. And I hope the paper kind of captures a lot of the conversations we've had. Sitting alongside then, we've gone through a kind of prioritisation process, so it's impossible to describe the wealth and variety of work that's taking place across the four trusts, 35. Have done working with colleagues is try to pick out around 20 key priority projects to use as kind of trackers of our performance in terms of collaborative work and over the course of the year. We've tried to describe how those will deliver in terms of objectives and outcomes. A bit more work to do, and I think probably more on the quality side of things. The other ones are a bit more articulated, and that's down to me and to do a bit more work on that. Tried to describe what our quarterly deliverables might look like. And Ian, Matthew and colleagues have really come back each quarter and say this is how we progressed against the plan. So by the end of the year, the hope will be we'll be able to reflect not just on delivery of a really aspirational and challenging operational plan, on a challenging and very stretching financial plan, but we'll be able to look across those 20 programs and say, or projects, and say this is what we've achieved as a collaborative on top of everything else. So I'll pause there. I hope that was reasonably very for me.
Perfect, Jonathan. Thank you. And so can I first of all just come to Catherine as the chair of our Finance Performance Committee? You've given us a good going over already, so I'm going to give us some feedback and then I'll open up for questions.
Thanks very much, Chair. So I think the first thing I'd say is just to reiterate the comments that colleagues made about the amount of work that's gone into getting us to this place, and that we're stacking up very well nationally in terms of the robustness of the planning process, and also as a starting point for 2024, both financially and operationally. So I think there's an awful lot to be pleased about in terms of the work that's been undertaken and the position we're now in as a collaborative. I think also it's been a very helpful process in terms of accumulating a lot of the conversations we've had over the last year. We've worked through, I think, individually across the various collaborative committees and in BIP, what does it mean to be in a collaborative? What is the additionality of working collaboratively? And so my perspective is very much that this end of year process has enabled us really to pull those thoughts together and to take stock and to have that forward look in terms of our strategy, what we aspire to achieve, how we're using the collaborative to deliver against some of the objectives we set ourselves in terms of the quality of access and so on and so forth. So, I think it's been a really interesting and exciting process in that respect. We are in a good place, and I do think colleagues have highlighted it's not without risk. It really is not without risk. So there's significant financial risk there. We've got very demanding SIP targets that certainly the collaborative FPC provided quite a lot of challenge to our executive colleagues about, the robustness and substantial nature of planning. So certainly as a committee, we'll be continuing to absolutely focus on that. Operationally, I think we have made enormous strides over the last year right across the collaborative in terms of our operational performance. And it is so disappointing that industrial action is going to, really get how much progress we've made. So I think that'll be a little bit of a challenge of us, being able to sort of disaggregate where we are and just ensure that we manage to maintain that focus and momentum going forward. But I think those are the key points.
Thank you, Catherine. And this is coming forward from the Finance and Performance Collaborative Committee with a recommendation for approval. So we'll be asking for that at the end of taking some questions. Linda was first, then I saw a flash out.
So start by saying I do think it's really good to see it all written down. It is really, really clear. So a couple of questions, not even necessarily for answering today. I'm aware that the devil is in the detail of all of this, obviously. So, but the two things that I'd be interested to explore, one is in terms of how you do the read across, because the last one in some ways, I completely agree, is kind of really exciting. But then there are some big chunky things in there that don't necessarily read through to the other two plans. Outpatients is one that jumps out at me, I think Guinea as well. So how we deal with that, where they are, interesting and exciting and really worthwhile projects, but how do we build them into the operating plan and business plan? And then the second one is a kind of similar question, which again didn't jump out at me, is how we are building in the infrastructure to enable those things to happen in a very challenging world of how finances work and how decision making works, how we make sure that some of those, again, really exciting and interesting things that the collaborative could deliver on, ophthalmology, outpatients, etc. We actually have got an infrastructure that enables that to happen in a way that the NHS isn't really designed to do, and how we kind of feed that into a kind of clinical services strategy that actually can enable that to happen in a reasonably speedy way when we feel the need to actually take action on those things. I hope that's clear in terms of the question.
Jonathan, I'm going to take this as well. Do you want to take them one at a time, or shall I take all the questions and there's daily questions, but I've no doubt people will come back if you skipped over their questions, so don't use that as an excuse for not answering. Bob was first, and then.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Jenny. Bob Alexander, Vice Chair Imperial, Ned at London North West. Less a question, more an observation, but it's something that inevitably I think we'll come back to. So we've heard from colleagues, and there has been an inordinate amount of work, so let's start that from day one. But you know, the ink is dry on the page, and we're talking about activity changes that are happening and being forced upon us by, and we don't have an end state as yet to such circumstances. So immediately, rather than wanting to do a replanning exercise, but it gets me into the territory of at some point part of the future planning must have some level of sensitivity analysis around it for impact of what we've recognised as being a plan with a challenge, and that challenge will not be helped by some of the activity changes that we're having to make and some of the stress on people that activity change is putting on them. And so it's really it's less a question, more a plea, but can we start thinking about that now as we think about impact more generally?
Thanks. Janet and then Steve.
Thank you. Janet Shugan, Vice Chair of London North West, and Ned on Imperial. I appreciate there's been a huge amount of work done here, but I was struck by the fact we're talking about an overall staffing reduction of over 900 full-time equivalents. And I suppose we would just like some reassurance or assurance as to how that's going to be achieved. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve.
I had two questions, one financial and one operational. So maybe you could say a little bit more on the split of the cost improvement program between the non-recurrent and the current, so that we can actually, so that we can understand what the impact is on reducing our underlying deficit. And the second one on operational is we're in the plan, we're looking at the G&A bed occupancy of 94 or 94.5%. Against a target of 92. Can you say a little bit more about how we address that and what the impact is?
Take what you want and distribute the others. Microphone.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And can I first of all say thank you to Bob for being worried about stress on our people. Coming from where it's come from, that's really appreciated, can I just say. So can I go back to the infrastructure and the join up between the plans? So you're right, there isn't complete join up between the plans at the moment. I think that's a fair observation, and that goes to the work in progress. We do need to join that up. And one of the discussions that the four of us were having last night actually was, we were talking about ophthalmology as it happened, which is how do you think about different infrastructure. So I think we've got a bit of experience in terms of the elective orthopedic centre. We need to build on that. And we've got some experience actually in the way that our clinicians work together now, our crews and our well, impact all of the functions. And I think we do need to build on it, and particularly from Imperial and the work that Bob Taylor's been doing, the building up of, how do we do that with people who've got a bit more time than actually some of the people to think about. I think it's a fair challenge. There was something I think around the overall, the staffing numbers. So I do think what we've done in all of this is to say, what does data tell us in terms of comparison, and how might we think about how we reorganise services, either together or indeed individually, to do that. So I think there is, and there is a differential opportunity, I think, in different places, and we need to put, I guess the first thing is we've got to be frank and transparent about what we're setting out to do, and have that discussion openly before we get to that. But I think again, it's a fair challenge. And I'll just do the bit about because Robert already pointed out to me that we hadn't addressed the fact that we ought to be looking at 92% occupancy, and that goes right back to the beginning of this meeting that says how do we make ourselves as efficient as possible. We do that data tells us by having something like a bed occupancy of 92%. We haven't, we're nowhere near it at the moment actually, but we do need to work to bring occupancy down so that we are much more efficient. But this is probably a bit more real than some of the things that we're being asked to do. It's sort of acknowledging that what's the likely thing to happen. I'm going to hand over to my colleague because there'll be, I think they're going to talk something about staffing, and I'll ask the CFOs to talk about the split recurrent and non-recurrent.
So I'll just address the staffing bit. So I just want to say upfront, that seems like a large number, that is the right number. So just to give some reassurance, every single cost improvement scheme has a quality improvement impact assessment undertaken by the nurse director, the medical director. So all of this has an assurance process and does not impact negatively on the quality of patients. That's really important. That happens in all 4 trusts. But actually the biggest number that we see the reduction in is our bank and agency usage. This is where we know it sits within the priority of the people work stream, but this is where we know we can be more efficient and actually provide a better quality of care to our patients if we use our own substantive staff that are working within our trust values, that are trained within North West London internal training and have the right appropriate support within us. So that's where we'll make the majority of that saving, and that's where the biggest gains are, and that's where we're focusing.
John.
Thanks very much, Matthew and colleagues. Super briefly, I'll just, if I just add one quick comment on the staffing question to Janet. Only it's a process question, if that makes sense. So the plan reflects our modelling. Included in the modelling is an assumption around the impact of the cost improvement programmes. We know as a collective we've identified 50%, so we set ourselves the ask of getting to 50% at the end of March, which was a big achievement, actually, given my collective history, though I know Bob's wise words about the deliverability of those plans and the need for, and then we've got the plan to deliver the rest of that over the next 2 months. If you flow through the model, that's how we get to the staffing numbers that we've included in the plan, but each individual CIP that would have a staffing impact will of course flow through the quality impact assessment process in each of the individual trusts. And I suspect that colleagues on the quality committee as well as on the finance committee will be keeping a bit of oversight on that. So when that modelling happens, if it happens, and there may be alternative models of service delivery, we've got cards in place to make sure that any change in staffing is appropriately managed and monitored. Apologies, colleagues, if I'm stating this. Just very briefly then on the CIP side of things and the underlying deficit. We didn't have a great track record in delivery of recurrent CIP last year, and I think we've learned some valuable lessons from that. So as a group of CFOs, we've set up a subgroup, and we are working quite hard with colleagues to make sure there's consistency approach and delivery method for organisations. The aspiration for this year is to deliver 100% of the CIP ask recurrently, but I think we will need to be realistic about that as we work through. So as we come back to the Finance Performance Committee, we'll be really clear about what's recurrent and what's non-recurrent and how we exit that over the next few months. I recognise that might seem like an evasive answer, but it's just where we are. The aspiration is 100%. Our aim is, but we will track and I think be a bit more explicit. The last thing to say, and then I will wind up, which is around the question of the underlying deficit. I think there's been, or rather we collectively think there's been a bit of a shift in the underlying deficit in the last year or so as a result of changes in the financial framework. So colleagues here will recall earlier in your tenure, Matthew, actually, I was bringing some really quite significant numbers of an underlying deficit that were driven by kind of historical calculations. I think the way in which the ICB works with us on the finances as a collaborative, and the way in which our own teams have been able to better understand activity flow, coding, cost base, means we're kind of revisiting the underlying deficit as we move into the financial year. There's 3 or 4 sources of it. The first one is the under delivery against the contracted activity values. And actually we're really seeing a significant increase month on month about that. So that kind of overpayment is, I think, very significantly reducing as we go through this financial year when we deliver against operational plans. that as well. The second is the level of kind of subsidy or additional payment that we're getting from the ICB, which Virginia alluded to. We are working on a really explicit plan to address that 66 million of additional subsidy this year, some of which there's a good case to say we've earned anyway, but I think it's worth us doing that full 66 million programme of work over the. And then there's another piece for us to do, just disentangle the complexity of modern financial flows in the NHS. Is ERF recurrent or non-recurrent? How do we treat that? So there's a piece of work for us to do over the next few months to kind of come back and revisit the underlying deficit. Our sense is that it has improved. We just need to demonstrate that to the collaborative momentum.
Thank you, John. AJ, did you want to come? I'll take one more brief question because I'd like to then move us on.
Just following up on that, Jonathan. So presumably the modelling takes care of the retention, turnover, and ways of working strategies. So all of that's built in. It's currently we're hovering around sort of 30% of the turnover.
Do you mind completely, because I didn't really give enough credit to the really hard work that the chief people officers have done in pulling together the plan. So is it okay to pass that over to Kevin?
Yeah, there's consistency there in terms of the vacancy rate that is of our behavioural that is agency. So if those some of this is about replacing premium rate staff, but we can't get away from some of the fact it's about right sizing the workforce, because we have grown over the last 3 years as the workforce, and it's getting back into the appropriate size of work available. So there are some tough challenges as well as that. So premium rate and productivity gain.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that, Kevin. Okay, I'm going to ask the board for approval for these three plans. I see nods all around the table. So thank you. I'd like to move us on now to the full business case for the Elective Orthopaedics Centre. We discussed this in some detail at the last board meeting. Progress is being made, has been made.
Thank you. So it's really exciting to bring this here. I feel the midwife in me feels it's been a very long gestation, but there you go. I was contacted by an ex-director of North West London who was a director 8 years ago who said, well done, we tried this 8 years ago. So it's nice to get it to this place. I just want to introduce Mark Titcombe, who's the Managing Director for the Ealing and Central Middlesex site and will be the SRO for the Elective Orthopaedics Centre. So any questions to Mark? But just reminding everybody of the need for this, really, the case for change. So we have had a 30% increase in the waiting list of patients waiting for low-risk orthopaedic operations, and we currently have 16,000 patients waiting for these procedures within North West London. You'll know that this has been here before as an outline business case. It then had a very extensive public consultation. And then the decision-making business case and the public consultation was approved by the Joint Overview Scrutiny Committee of North West London and also approved by the ICB board last month. So this is now the full business case that comes here for approval of the London North West board for the expense of the capital, but also for the Acute Collaborative board for realising the implications of financial savings this will bring across a lengthy period to the North West London Acute Collaborative. I think the clinical model really hasn't changed much. We've really stuck to what we committed to at the start. There is just one point of change in the pathway for patients, and that is for the procedure. So they come to the orthopaedic centre for the procedure. The rest remains done locally, either starting with the GP, then done in the local hospital, come into the orthopaedic centre for an operation, and then seen post-operation by the local hospital. And we stuck to that all the way through. The change and the strengthening of the clinical model is to combine the MSK community pathway, and that was really loudly heard by the public actually, and a really important point for them to raise in that the ICB are also commissioning an MSK pathway, and it's a great opportunity for us to align the two, so they are now completely aligned and streamlined as to one pathway, which was a really helpful opportunity. The only thing I'd like to say really is the additional thing that's being added in terms of the finances, the social investment model. Please don't ask me details on that. I divert to Jonathan for that. But that does strengthen the return of investment and looks at a more comprehensive way of looking at the social investment of this model of care across our community. The implementation is now the key stage. So we are planning to implement this and open this centre in November, which you can be aware is a very short time frame. The plan is to open 5 days a week on 2 clinical sessions, so an 8-hour period of operating for those that don't understand clinical sessions. That will be reviewed at a 6-month point, and then we'll look to move to 6 days a week and 3 clinical sessions. So that's how we're looking at ramping that up. There is a very, very detailed implementation plan that will all work together to go through, and a very robust governance structure that takes the gateway approval process that will be approved by the London North West Finance and Performance Committee at each step of the progress to this to go live. Mark has now recruited a central team to help with the implementation with him, including an increase in our HR team. A large portion of this is recruitment. So we've increased the number of people within the HR team to be able to lead that recruitment. We've also got implementation managers working with Mark, so we can really start to mobilise and deliver this work by November. But otherwise, the other important thing to say actually is the travel. So there's detailed travel work in here, there's detailed analysis about the choice of site. But what is really important is the commitment and the real commitment that we want to work with stakeholders in a travel group, and we've already identified the community population stakeholders. We've got really good engagement from TfL at the moment actually around looking at aligning and changing bus routes for us to connect our hospitals. So that will be a really powerful and important group, and that group will start to meet next month.
Brilliant.
Happy to
Thanks
take any questions.
Pippa. I'm going to take a couple of questions. As I said, we've discussed this lengthily at the board and in subcommittee, so I don't push them very long. And if do we have any questions, David, please.
Excuse me. So David Moss, non-exec of London North West and Imperial, and chair of the Finance and Performance Committee at London North West. And I just want to echo what Pip has said, in that you've been through very thorough piece of all this. And this is, of course, a big opportunity, and the first big opportunity for the collaborative. So the governance of it will be tracked at every F&P meeting, not only its approvals, but its implementation. And we'll work closely with Mark to ensure it is successful. But we absolutely support it and look forward to it.
Brilliant, thank you, that's very helpful. Any other questions? Okay, I would like, first of all then, to ask the members of the London North West Board whether they are comfortable to approve the full business case and the capital funding requirement that is in front of them here. Yes, that is approved, and then I'd like to ask the board as a whole to approve this plan moving forward. Very good, thank you very much indeed. Good work, and good luck. Very good. And then I'm coming on to the most exciting part of the event.
I'll keep this brief as it's so exciting. So the paper seeks approval of delegated authorities from the 4 trust boards to respective board committees for the sign-off of various year-end processes. We've got, as you'll see from the paper, there are various deadlines over the next 2 to 3 months around some of the submissions we need to make at year-end. And I won't go through each of them individually, they're summarised in the paper. And due to those timescales, we will not have the chance to discuss those in full at this board in common. So in line with common practice, and this is established practice that we've had over the last few years or so, we delegate authority to the audit committees and the quality committee to review the annual accounts and annual report, and obviously the quality committee to look at the quality account as well on behalf of the trust boards.
Questions? Okay, I think probably should run through these board by board, should I?
Just, yeah, if you want to just approval by each board.
So the schedules are pretty much the same. So first of all, I'm asking the board of members of Chelsea and Westminster, are they happy with this delegation? Thank you very much. Then the board of Imperial College Hospital, are we happy with this delegation? Good. Then the board of London North West, are we happy with this delegation? And the board of Hillingdon Hospital, break up the party. Board of Hillingdon Hospital, we're happy. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, there you go, Peter. Okay, we are moving on now to the Integrated Quality Workforce Performance and Finance section of our agenda. Liz, can I hand it over to you to steer us through this?
Just going to go straight to Councillor.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure, Leslie. Thank you. So I'm not going to make a huge issue here. I think that the report is, I think, taking shape. I don't think we're quite where we ultimately want to be, and as people will know, the way that the individual trusts count stuff is surprisingly different. And it goes for money, but it also goes for quality. And we have been working quite hard to try and make sure that we are unifying the way that we do things. An important example of that is, of course, the work we're doing around framework for next year to make sure that we have that. But I do think there are some interesting things. Looking at the report, there are no sort of major red flags, I think, in the quality report at the moment. I think that, as I mentioned in my Imperial report, I think there are issues that all the trusts are addressing around hospital-acquired infections. And although I use the phrase hospital, quite a lot of the work needs to be done at the interface of the community and the hospital, because there is quite a lot of issues about where patients do pick up infections and where the intervention needs to be in order to reduce the number of infections. I think that is that's important. I think in terms of the rest of the performance, it's good to see, I think, and thanks hugely to Robert and Janice for working incredibly hard on getting our maternity reporting better framework. I think that, again, there is nothing there that makes me concerned. We went through all of the data yesterday. Part of the data we're looking at here is a month after, actually, the data we looked at the Oricon report. We haven't seen any flags arise. I think that we have taken the opportunity to be careful about how we want to refine the reporting for next time. I think with some of the quality measures, we're measuring very small numbers of incidents each month. So looking at the monthly figure is not always the best way of getting the right. It's very helpful year-to-date figures. So I will leave it there. If there are specific questions that people would like to flag in the report, I'm very happy to take them.
Let's take quality questions. I mean, high quality questions usually.
No, I didn't have a quality question. I just wondered if it made sense logically to cover the comments about the quality committee at this point, or whether you'd like, because it all flows together in quality.
Let's do that, Steve. Would that feel good to you? I'm very happy. I think that's a good answer. Okay. Right, so from the Collaborative Quality Committee in the last one, we looked at the emergency pathway review, and as we were saying earlier, there are some learnings that we think we'll gain from the activities that were associated with the junior doctor strike. So that will be the next stage that we'll be looking at. Around it. We continue to look at the 6 quality work streams. I won't go through them all. We've had them for some considerable time now, and they've all been confirmed. A couple of very brief comments. The Get It Right First Time work stream will now include the peer reviews as part of that, and we did agree that the peer reviews, the next ones that we're planning, will be discharged in April and May, assuming we're not of course by more strikes, and paediatric ED in June and July, and that the Get It Right First Time would focus on a small number of areas with evidence around driving the action plans. We also spent some time on mortality and clinical harm. And I would say that has gone through detailed review with each of the local trust quality committees. It's gone through like a collaborative quality committee,
Maybe there's one point that we would pull out associated with Shimmy and MSR, which Roger can touch on later when he gets to we get to 4.4. And we did agree on the quality account timetable. There were no points to escalate to that.
Thank you very much. Any questions to Tim? Or take contribution from Tim and then I'll
Sorry, yes, I mean, just to follow up a couple of those things. So, we'll have a very lengthy discussion about HSMR and Shimmy and which of those we should be using to measure mortality. I think our view remains, having contacted and had some quite lengthy discussions with Telstra Health, who provide the data for us, that we should continue to measure both because they measure different things. So Shimmy measures mortality up to 30 days after discharge, whereas HSMR measures in-hospital discharge. There are some vagaries about the way it's calculated, as Matthew and I have had a discussion about subsequently, and they can be impacted by things, the way that you code things, so we are looking carefully at that. There has been an interesting jump up, you will see, between June and July of the HSMR. That has stabilised. It is also reflected right the way across the NHS. We have now established, and if you look at all the shelter groups, hospitals, that's happened to them. It does usually happen at that point in the year because of the data are refreshed once a year. However, the size of the increase this year is really quite substantial, and Telstra at the moment don't understand why that is. We're currently looking at that. We are also contract with Imperial to look at a specialty level at HSMR. We're now expanding that across the collaborative to make sure that we understand at a specialty level if there is any specific concern that we should have. What's interesting to note is that although the number has increased somewhat, 7%, rankings of the trusts in the NHS in terms of mortality hasn't changed, so we remain extraordinarily safe in regards to every other set of organisations. Final thing I would just like to highlight, so we're going to change the GIRF is a horrible ASM for changing that to that work stream is now around pathway innovation and we had a initial discussion yesterday at CEOs, which we will continue to have, which is that those are the things that need operational response in order to really deliver change. So we're going to work through how to make sure that we've joined up quality with our operational teams and everybody else to make sure that we've done the right level of clinical engagement and then are able to deliver.
I think this point about in-hospital mortality, I think data shows that we will still be best in the country because we look at the data really closely, what we're seeing across the country post-COVID. I think a system like this has a responsibility to identify that through research and hand it back to the NHS to understand what's going on. So I'm pleased that we flagged that question, and now I've got smart people looking at whether it is a data anomaly or whether it is a real thing. It's a real thing somebody should know. So, Patricia, then I'm going to come to Sally for a question.
So actually, it's a question from me to the medical and nurse directors, and it relates to the issue about feedback from patients. So we use the Friends and Family test. It's well known that feedback from patients is a very good thermometer about how care or the quality of care that's being provided. But the trouble is the Friends and Family test tends to be very low numbers, and therefore there's a question about the validity of the data. And I just wondered if there'd been any discussions about either how we get more feedback or whether or not we should be looking at a different measure in North West London, perhaps testing a different way of gathering patient feedback.
Who wants to have a crack at that? Go on, Lisa.
Sorry, not the director, but leading patient experience at Imperial. We've got some work done in there with the others now, and the workshop we've got a date for the 19th of May, where we're actually going to come together, kind of do a look and share at where we've got best practice. And there's certainly around occupancy. In our place, we've got stuff with AI, free text, comments, so there's a lot going on in there.
Great. Thank you. So,
thank you, Chair. Hi, Ned at London North West and Chelsea Investments. So my question is about healthcare-associated infections and the occupancy rate or the bed occupancy rate. And evidence says that if you have a higher occupancy rate, there is an increasing risk of healthcare-acquired infections. And we see that our occupancy rate, especially in critical areas, is high. So it's the balance to be achieved between efficiency and making sure we still have that ideal occupancy rate. So what can be done about that? Thank you.
Thank you. Tim, sounds like
so, I mean, if you're absolutely right to say that there is a link between bed occupancy and healthcare-associated infections, there is also, of course, a link between the state of our estate and healthcare-associated infections. And we know that a lot of our estate is not in as good repair as we would like it to be. I think the other thing, though, is worth, if you're as old as I am, if you spool back 10 years, the number of healthcare-associated infections we were looking at then was probably between 3 and 5 times as great as it is now. And there hasn't been a massive change in bed occupancy. So you can make improvements by processes, but of course where you are absolutely right is that you have to be absolutely rigorous about those processes if you have very high bed occupancy. Now, across the NHS, there's a big campaign at the moment to try and create more beds. Again, we have issues that not all of our estate is amenable to sort of the modular to do at the moment. Some are, I think, and that would be helpful because if we can get bed occupancy down, that's important. But I think there's a sense here that there's some stuff that we can change and some stuff that we can't change. And the things that we really need to focus on are the processes that will allow us to make meaningful change. And that really is about the work with teams at a ward and patient level to make sure that everybody is doing everything. I mean, you're right. It would be an awful lot easier in a larger estate that is entirely purpose-built.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, so starting with elective, the data you've got in here is the end of February. I think the 78-week position that's reported to board was, I'm just trying to find the slide, 242. We actually ended the financial year with 132, so significant progress from that figure. I think every trust has their own challenges, but I think the benefits of working across the collaborative mean that we can get more patients treated quicker. And I think there's a slide in here around the theatre utilisation, which whilst we are the best in London, and London is the best region nationally, there is still more work to do, and we're working with the ICB on a theatre transformation programme across the acute provider landscape to treat as many patients as we possibly can. So that's all I will say about electives.
Thanks. Apologies, I didn't introduce myself when I spoke earlier. I'm Claire Hook, I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Imperial. So in terms of urgent and emergency care, I think we've covered many of the issues over the course of the conversation so far. So it's been a busy and turbulent time. Our focus has absolutely been on getting through the winter, navigating the industrial action and also supporting the elective recovery programme as far as we can do. Our performance generally benchmarks well nationally and in London, but it isn't where we want it to be. And we've each got an improvement programme for the various different elements of UVC performance. And we continue on a day-by-day basis to support each other through mutual aid. And we've also got through the UVC board and the peer review progress, we're supporting each other with best practice, learning from one another to make sure we've got consistent systems and processes in place around SDEC, discharge, patient flow and those things. And that's what I'll say.
James Walters, Coo, London North West. Summarising the cancer performance, it fell slightly in January, not uncommon due to other seasonal pressures at that time of year, but that's very positive to report that we remain above both the national and London average on cancer performance for all of the 4 cancer measures quoted in the pack. 2-week wait demand continues to be very high, and that can challenge both the diagnostic flow and the pace at which we need to create those appointments within busy clinic schedules. The faster diagnostic standard is 5% short of the standard, but as you've seen from our operating plan pack for next year, we are planning to achieve that standard, and performance has already started to improve up to the standard. 31-day treatment continued to see some demand pressures, particularly driven by workforce in key specialties. We're just 1.7% below the standard in that domain. And then finally, whilst our 62-day performance continues to be a challenge as a percentage, I'm pleased to report that we remained on trajectory for the 62-day backlog clearance. So the number of patients experiencing that level of wait is very much reducing, and at the end of the year it was at the lowest it has been for the entire year.
So strategically, we've just done a review of our year diagnostic programme, which actually I'll probably bring to the board next time for information about the transformation across the ICB diagnostics. The CDCs are ongoing, and actually working with Chelsea and Westminster and moving the MRI scanner from West Mid to Mount Vernon is having a 40% reduction month on month in MRI breaches at Hillingdon, because patients are happier to go to Mount Vernon than they were to go to West Middlesex. So that's having a significant improvement on our overall DMO1 performance, so that is recovering. Although Hillingdon still has the biggest backlog, we're expecting that to reduce significantly over the next quarter. I think it's probably just worth saying that whilst we focus a lot on imaging, because that is the biggest, most expensive part, we have been very successful as an acute care collaborative of bringing in additional capital funding to boost our diagnostic capacity, and nationally the expectation is that diagnostics will grow year on year 5% for the sector and indeed nationally. And so Jonathan and myself are working with the ICB CFO Steve Bloomer to look at how the revenue funding for that additional capacity year on year will continue to be funded, because that is quite a big significant ask for our population. And this year's priorities outside continuing with all the work in imaging will change focus to the ophthalmology piece and indeed to audiology, where we know nationally there is avoidable sight and hearing loss. So we've got the next programme of work just starting now.
Thank you.
I don't know if we just move on to workforce.
Yeah, let's take the workforce. So this workforce report back is a big step up. So yeah, thank you for the
Thanks to the team at Raven. So just really briefly, so you'll know we've aligned our ESR, so ESR is our data collection for workforce. So we've got that aligned now. We've got a little bit more work to do at London North West just to make sure we're all counting in the same way. And we've gone through governance processes to make sure that we can now just pull that in one place. So that's really helped with our reporting. We have had a reduction in vacancy rate to 9.5%, which is fantastic. It's continued to reduce and it's now below the target. You can understand that I'll be now questioning what the target should be. And we've also had a continued reduction in our voluntary turnover rate, which is also really positive. We had a peak post-COVID. Nationally, we saw that, and now it seems to have stabilised and started to reduce, which is great. Same for our sickness and absence rates, which you would normally see this time of year. Our agency spend is a concern and something we're monitoring. It's a slightly artificial concern, if I'm honest, because the trust that's got the biggest increase is London North West, who have consistently held to the 2% agency target that we're all achieving to. That's because of the urgent taking over of the urgent care centre, where we've got a lot of agency staff. So we're just working through a process of bringing them into substantive staff, and that will go back to a 2% target, but will continue to work. The other trusts are doing good work actually reducing their agency spend to that 2% target. Our biggest challenge on here is appraisals, and each of the chief execs are working hard within their organisations now to do some of the catch-up work that we missed during COVID of appraisals and getting back into that normal routine to really get back and get our appraisal rates up to what we would expect. And core compliance has increased this month back above 90%.
Great.
I just want to do, I might as well do two finance bits with John JB, you're going to do, aren't you?
JB's doing it, yes, thank you. John Bell, Chief Finance Officer for Hillingdon Hospital. So just the report you have in the pack is actually for the month 11 position, which was showing quite a substantial variance at that point actually, but actually as you've heard earlier in the meeting, we have all now met our plan across the whole of the acute provider collaborative. So we've reported, or in the process of reporting, subject to audit, we should say, a £5.6 million deficit across the provider collaborative, which was the planned deficit that we had. As at month 11, again, the main driver of the variance that we saw at month 11 is around the non-recurrent CRPs, or the non-delivery of CRPs, which we've also talked about in terms of that risk carries on into next year. We highlighted a couple of risks in here that we were concerned about around things like inflation and winter pressures, and again, we've been able to manage those in the year end, but some of those, particularly inflation, does create a sort of recurrent problem into the future, which is a risk we will continue to have to manage. In terms of capital again, we've all met our capital plans pretty much. And in terms of cash, I mean, the cash position still looks reasonably healthy across the patch, although it has come down, as you can see, during the year, by about 76 million. And that was all I was going to say really on the finance position.
Thank you. So any questions on finance performance, workforce? Okay, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for those reports. We can move to the reports from the collaborative committees. Not counting Steve, he doesn't get 2 goes at it. Finance and performance. Please, Catherine.
Thank you very much. And I think, like Claire, I probably didn't introduce myself. So, Catherine Jervis, Vice Chair at Hillingdon and Chair of the Finance and Performance Collaborative Committee. So we pretty much covered, I think, in a fair amount of detail, the key areas that were discussed and explored at our last collaborative committee. So those were the year-end position in terms of both our finances and performance, the financial, operational and business planning process, which we've all adopted for the collaborative, and the elective orthopaedic centre. So those were very much the key areas of discussion. Just by way of reiteration, the key risk areas to escalate were around the 78-week waiters. So I think we've heard that we entered the year in a good position, not as good as we had hoped and as the trajectory would have been without the industrial action, but not in a bad place. And we have further hikes in place to put us in a good position in terms of our RTTs. We were noting and planning for the future industrial action at that point, and I guess as we've noted today, that continues to be an area of focus for us in terms of that becoming almost part of our business as usual, and very much noting Bob's point for the collaborative committee about really ensuring that we start to sort of consider how that sort of gets reflected in our discussions and our performance. And then the third and final point from me is really to reiterate the level of risk inherent in achieving financial plans within our business planning process. That's all from me, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any questions? Very good. Thank you very much. Moving on to Janet on the people.
Thank you. Pippa's talked about the fact that the vacancy rate has come down, which is really good news in terms of, that's a special cause improvement. However, what it hides is areas of real shortage, be it midwives, be it Band 5 nurses, be it operating department practitioners, be it sonographers, be it occupational therapists, be it middle grade doctors, be it physios, speech and language therapists and healthcare scientists. So perhaps not surprisingly, therefore, sort of the collaborative workforce committee have said that for this year we want to set up a recruitment hub for these hardest to fill vacancies, and also a career hub and transfer scheme, because this isn't just about turnover. It's not just about recruitment. What we have to do is actually improve our sort of retention rates as well. And as you know, there's a current initiative regarding international medical graduates coming in to help reduce our sort of staff shortages and reduce agency spend. And what we're also looking at doing, and thanks to the good work at Chell West, is actually increasing the take-up of apprenticeships. And from the staff surveys, the issues around bullying and harassment and so on was a general theme. So more work needs to be done in that area. And then finally, they are going to look at the HR aspects of corporate consolidation if we do more of that in the future. So that's the report.
Fantastic. Any questions or comments from anybody? Patricia, please.
John Stuart Ocker, I was just interested to see the comparison. And I certainly know that we've had a lot of discussion locally about how to really improve uptake, and particularly, I think it applied to most of us that we got to a point where we couldn't actually increase COVID rates much higher because we actually don't have any more vaccine. But I wonder if the committee had or intends to have any discussion about how into this next year, given that we know that sickness rates if staff are vaccinated and we present less risk to our patients, is there anything we can do as a collaborative to really increase our uptake rates as we go into this next year?
Yeah, I'm going to hand over to Pippa for that.
Yeah, so absolutely, we've had conversations at what works well. I think some of this has to be localised. We know that we've got different diverse staff groups, and actually some of the staff champions from their diverse staff groups worked really well. They are the people that can have the biggest influence in the staff, and we're convincing them to think differently about vaccination. I was also actually on the National Vaccination Board yesterday, and there will be a change in the vaccination programme. We're just concluding what that will look like. So we are actively engaged in what that will look like. So we're ready to run a vaccination programme for winter next year.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much for that, Janet. So, Infrastructure Committee, Bob.
Thank you, Matthew. I hope the report's pretty self-explanatory. The committee had spent a fair bit of time trying to understand the assurances around the full implementation of Cerner EPR across those organisations that are going through it now, just because of the huge enabling benefit that will give the collaborative when all 4 trusts are on it. There's been some excellent work done around the green plan baselining across all 4. And the importance of that is we can now start to track delivery against the NHS commitments around green planning and sustainability. And then we have finally got to a place where we can start pulling some estate collaboration together. And again, that will initially, I think, operate as a baselining exercise so that we're fully conversant with high utilisation, low utilisation estate. And I think that will help the collaborative going forward in terms of looking for opportunities as we know capacity is strained in certain places. But clearly I'll take any questions that colleagues have got.
Any questions or comments from the board? Thank you very much. In which case, I ask the board to note those reports, thank the committees for their continuing excellent work. I do think those committees are getting better each time we meet. So, and I think they're doing some proper heavy lifting work now. So thank you all for that work. And moving on to item 4.4, learning. Yes. Can I turn to you, Roger?
Thank you. Roger Chin, I'm Chief Medical Officer at Chelsea Westminster. I think I'm going to keep my comments brief given the rich discussion we've just had around the nuances related to HSMR and SHIMI. And maybe that's an important piece of work that we're all engaged on. I think it's been said that the mortality ratios and indices demonstrate that as an acute cardiac collaborative, we're one of the safest places to receive hospital care in the country, and I think we should remain very proud of that, whilst looking at how we can learn from all death that occurs in our care. And I'm going to simply limit that learning point to one comment at this stage, which is that each of the organisations is very familiar with how to undertake that process and looks at its deaths in a very detailed way to make sure that local learning is coming together. But by bringing this work together across the collaborative, we're developing our themes. And the clearest theme that is coming out at this point is that we all have issues with treatment escalation plans for deteriorating patients and for end-of-life care. That's actually reassuring because it aligns with our plan to have this as one of our quality priorities for the next year. This is a piece of work that this work supports us moving forward with. So I'll leave it at that because I think the comments that have been made lesson reporting, which we are working further on to align.
Thank you, Roger. Just stay on the subject of all of the reports are excellent reports and really, you read all four of them back to back, you notice where they're not the same and where they are identical and have lifted and shifted the same reports from national. So I think there's probably some work, because it certainly helps me when I'm picking my way through to see where we're the same and where we're different.
Yeah, and I can assure you that piece of work is underway, and I would expect that for the next board we would have alignment in the reporting structure and content.
So, any questions or comments? Saeed, please.
Thank you, Chair. Excellent report. A mention about table 2, wherein the family concerns seem to be quite a lot more than the clinical concerns, and most of the time we know that it's communications. So what steps are in place to improve communication with family so that these can be reduced? Thank you.
That's a question about how we improve communications with the family in order to big families, I think. Is that right, Saeed?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I think it's an important point. And what I want to say is that the Institution of Medical Examiners as an approach has really improved that over the last 2 years and will continue to do so. They are a key interface undertaking the earliest scrutiny of all deaths. And they work with the medical examiner's offices to ensure that that engagement with families is undertaken at the earliest stage, which is really helping them. As they roll out into scrutiny of all deaths in the community, that will become a larger task, but it will remain a very important part of the way that we look after our bereaved families.
Thank you, Roger. Any other comments or questions? Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to ask the board to note those reports and thank the people who put the work into compiling them and particularly showing up in the whole thing. Right, moving on to the reports from our trust audit committees, which, as people will know, report directly to the board, not via a collaborative audit committee. So I'm going to walk. Someone's got a risk register. So if we could go first of all to Aman and the Chelsea Investments audit.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I've got a bit of a sore throat. Just to say that the committee went well. There's really nothing to report back. The report can be seen as read, and there are no matters of escalation at all, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Moving on to Imperial Nick.
Again, report can be taken as read. I think we should note that we missed the committee, which we had to do by e-governance because it coincided with the junior doctors' strike. So there isn't a report on that meeting yet, but it went ahead in terms of particularly the internal audit plan, which is ongoing, which others may have approved in full meetings and we didn't. at that point. I would make a comment, hopefully not taking the thunder of everybody else, that although we don't meet collaborative, you said we have had a meeting collaborative, and I think it's one of the important things to say is that we have looked at all our internal plans and are seeking to align around common themes, and that's a developing thing. Because at the time this year, the alignment may not be as great as it might be in future, but it's certainly an ongoing process. And there have been some helpful discussions in our collaborative meetings about particularly internal audit. But otherwise, the report I would take as read.
Question?
Yes. Could you say a little bit more about the number of extreme risks, which started at 110 and is now happily down to 38? That does seem like, if you look comparatively across the collaborative, that seems like a fairly substantial number. Is our understanding and our appetite for risk different? And is that a piece of work that the audit chairs are undertaking?
I think that I would highlight that as an Imperial specific issue. Imperial is currently going through a considerable effort to sort of look at its risk assurance framework, board assurance framework, and its previous practice. And as part of that, one of the first elements that was undertaken was the executive went through what was currently there. So it's starting from a base point. And we realised that as we went through that, there were a number of extreme risks that probably hadn't been updated. So it is a point of development, but I can see Peter wants to add to that.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. So it's multifactorial indeed in terms of the number of extremists. Partly it's about appetite and partly it's because of the risks that the Imperial sites pick up in terms of estate. So what we have done is tracked extreme risks that sit on both divisional risk registers and corporate risk registers, and there is duplication because of the estate issues, and hence why the number has come down. But there is work to do across the collaborative in terms of understanding appetite that's been applied, and that was a conversation we had with the audit chairs around how we get a collaborative view of risk, as well as some sort of standardised approach to risk at each individual trust, so we can compare apples with apples.
Thank you. Moving on, Bob for London North West.
Thank you, Chair. As others, reports hopefully pretty self-explanatory. Building on Nick's point though about alignment. One of the things that this report explicitly reports, the report coming out of this committee dealt with was the HFMA cross NHS trust finance benchmarking type work. That clearly, and I can see my CFO colleagues nodding, this clearly adds an opportunity for learning across slide 4. And this will be the first of many building on the comments that Nick's made. We will align where it makes sense to align, and local specific where we need to recognise local specific, and that will be the way in which the audit chairs work going forward, I think.
Evan,
thank you. So the only item really I want to call out of the February the 20th meeting is of the 3 internal reports that were reviewed, only one, sickness absence management, received limited assurance, and that's gone to People Committee so that they can scrutinise the improvement actions in that domain. Apart from that, there are no other risks or escalations to call out. There are 2 governance issues I just wanted to cover now. Firstly, the committee reviewed and would like to ratify the health and safety policy, and therefore asks for delegated authority from the Hillington board here to do so. So if that could just be put.
I just have confirmation that members of the Hillington board are happy for that delegation. Lots of nods around the table, it's all yours.
Great. And then the second one is that the committee reviewed and supported the proposal from the Charitable Funds Committee to de-restrict 2 funds currently held by the Trust Charity. And then approval to do this is therefore again sought from the Hillington board.
Are members of the Hillingdon board happy to give that approval? Yes, we have. Thank you.
That's great. That's all from me.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the audit.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the audit chairs. I'd just like to cycle back to this alignment question again, because a bit like with the learning competence report, all of the reports are really good reports, and when you read all four of them back to back, you start to ask yourself whether something's being discussed in one audit committee and not in a, because that was a conscious decision, it was important to that audit committee and not the other, or whether different decisions are being made about the way the addendum is being constructed. So I think it would be helpful to us if the audit chairs collaborated in agreeing what their agendas were on the quarterly cycle, that we had some of it that was common and some of it which was local, but that we knew that consciously things were being discussed, so that the way in risk, extreme risk to being handled in Imperial and not elsewhere, that is a conscious decision to do it like that, and not that things are just bubbling onto an agenda, on the agenda in different places. So one risk, one audit committee, they will be different from place to place, but I think it would be good for the next cycle if we could, if we had a common look and feel to the agenda, so we knew what was the same in all of them and what was different in all of them, if that was possible. But I'm pleased, and I know it's added a lot of value having the chairs get together and have those conversations. Hands to help us to push the alignment without breaking the importance of local audits. Thank you very much. To the board in common cabinet, which met once face-to-face and once through e-governance, because on the 14th of we had industrial action going on. We decided not to meet in order that the chief executives were free to run their organisations. We have a number of decisions that were made there due to timelines, which, as per the standing orders, are now back to you as the board. These are not for ratification; these are decisions that have been made because they needed to be made at that time. So we had the decision-making business case for the electric orthopedic centre, where we're now moved on beyond that. We've now seen the full business case that has come here. That was approved. We had the endoscopy capital development final business case for London North West. We had the ambulatory diagnostic centre outline business case for Chelsea and Westminster, and we had the treatment centre refurbishment strategic outline case for Chelsea and Westminster, all of which were approved by the cabinet. I think that is a good example of how we're now coordinating our capital developments in a way that we can be sure that we're not duplicating or missing things. Otherwise, I'm happy to leave it there as people will see the report. If anybody has any questions they want to ask about what went, happy to take them and hand them off to the questions. Okay, I will take that report as noted. Thank you very much indeed, and I will move us on to seal already. Excellent. So, David.
I can't compete with Peter for excitement. The use of the trust seal routinely comes to each of the boards. Boards will be familiar with that before we form the collaborative. This is a summary of the use of the trust seal for each respective board, brought to the board's attention for the boards respectively to note.
Thank you. I'm assuming no questions on that. More use of the trust seal than we sometimes get. That was quite exciting, really. Thank you all very much indeed. Okay. So we have got as far as any other business. To raise. Okay. Thank you very much indeed. I'm now going to, in a moment, take questions from the public. I probably ought to note, before I go to that, so that we have people's full attention, that we have some people departing after this meeting from the board. Melanie, who I thanked at our last meeting, but Frank Sinatra style has come back for one more tour. She kindly agreed to hang around until the successor comes into place. So I thank you again, but I won't embarrass you. But thank you, and we look forward to seeing you back at Chelwest shortly. Gooby, who has done an absolutely storming job as medical director, Hillingdon Hospital, and Patricia spoke about earlier, but off to my old patch, the Elbelina Hospital at Guy's and St Thomas's. So don't break it. But that's wonderful. And thank you so much for everything you've done. It's been an absolute joy working with you. You will be being stalked by Neil Kunj, for whom this is his final, after, is it 9 years you've been on? Yeah, that's, you should have come up for parole earlier than that, but it's 9 years on the Chelsea and Westminster and then on the collaborative board. So thank you so much for all of your work, and you are joining as a non-executive of the Guy's and St Thomas's board. So that is a great move for them. So yeah, enjoy yourself there. And finally, David, sitting to my left, who has been around the patch for, probably don't want to own up for how many years, but is most recently as Director of Governance for Hillingdon and London North West, and Lola Peters will play an absolutely crucial role in bringing this collaborative together. We wouldn't be where we are now if it wasn't for the phenomenal work. So thank you for the support you've given to me for over the past year, and I think you can be proud of this, and thank you for your work previously. I think you'll still be around and might give us odd bits of help here and there, so I look forward to seeing you around. But ours and the board's gratitude to all of those people for the tremendous work that they've done for us. So thank you very much. Okay, I'm now going to go on to questions from the public. I have 3 questions in writing, which I'm going to. The first one is on ophthalmology diagnostics and is from Brian Naylor. Brian, would you like to? The question's been summarised in its detail, but would you like to summarise the question, and then I will turn to Tim to give us a response. So, Brian, are you with us? I can see your screen in a backdrop. Okay, I will come back to you, assuming that we've come to you slightly earlier than you were expecting, and I will move on to Robin Sharp, Chair of Brent Patient Voice, who's given us a question about the new community diagnostics. Robin, are you with us? I can see your shoulder. Robin?
He went off on the phone, Chair. He was taking a phone call.
I'll come back to him too. And then I have, in fact, I have 4 questions. Sorry, 2 questions about the Elective Orthopaedic Centre. The first one from Jim Greeley, Hammersmith and Fulham Saver, RNHS. Jim, excellent. I begin to feel like one of those Radio 5 Live who's trying to run a call-in show, but I'm so glad you're here. Would you like to put your question?
Yes, Chair. It's nice to see and be seen. Very briefly, we welcome our Chair of HAFSON, and we very much welcome the EOC decision to move ahead in November. But we have some concerns. Right throughout the business case, there's a great deal made of joined up end-to-end patient experience from initial doctor referral right through to rehabilitation. And implicit in that is a recognition that that kind of end-to-end experience of patients is often unsatisfactory as we stand. My question is this: what mechanism will there be to ensure that actually is a cohesive experience for patients, that at each point there's not a stalling, that the patient patient isn't left in the dark, and that right throughout what should be a seamless end-to-end experience, the patient is kept involved in his or her treatment. So it's a management question, patient flow throughout the system, from initial referral to rehabilitation, with the quality question and the involvement question of the patients being implicit in all of this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Can I turn to Pippa?
Do you know, as Mark's done all the work, I'm actually going to hand to Mark.
Martin Gibb, Managing Director at CNH and Ealing. Thanks very much, Jim, for the question. I think there's two bits that I would say in terms of how do we ensure that sort of patient experience throughout. First piece, I think, is that we want to, I think we've articulated this within the full business case, involve patients in the design elements of the FBC as much as we can. So we've commented already around where we've got the opportunity to do that, for example, within the Transport Working Group, but we've also referred to within the alignment with the MSK pathway, and where we can bring patients in to make sure that in those elements, particularly the pre and the post-operative elements of the pathway, we can actually sort of do an element of co-design between now and launch. I think that's fairly critical. I think the other point worth referencing is the point Pip made earlier around the post, both pre and post-operative is and will take place within the local hospital. So that gives us the opportunity to build on what I know you're referring to as not perfect.
I've muted it.
Just got the opportunity to build on that in terms of that local sort of seamless piece as well as we develop the whole pathway.
Great, thank you. Thank you. That's fine. I've also got a question about the Electrical Orthopaedic Centre from Mary Hammer. Can I come to you for that question, please? Apologies if I've... oh, Meryl, sorry, there's a typo in my notes. Meryl, yeah, I can see you.
Yeah, can I just say the sound quality is just appalling, so I don't know whether you can hear me.
We can hear you.
I cannot hear people's answers. But my question is about the mention of a PFI initiative, which was not mentioned in the earlier papers. Given that in the past PFI initiatives have proved to be very expensive, not least in the longer term, can we be assured that this particular PFI initiative will not put any financial strain on the funding of the EOP? Further, can we have guarantees that, as this seems to be an extension of the existing PFI for Central Middlesex, any unexpected negative financial consequences will not be borne by the 4 trusts involved in the project?
Yeah, thank you. Hopefully you can hear me. So a very valid question. So the PFI is already a part of the financial consideration of the trust. It actually has nothing to do with the Electrical Orthopaedic Centre. What it does do is give us an opportunity. So because it is quite a modern estate, it actually is proven to be very easy to do changes and things to that estate. We've already just built some endoscopy suites there that have finished ahead of plan and cost slightly less than what we expected to, because we're working around a modern estate, whereas our Ealing site, we're doing some work for the community diagnostic hub, and that has presented some challenges because we're working with an older building. So we have some assurance and some already proven history that doing estates work on the Central Middlesex site, working very closely with our PFI team, which Mark works nearly every day with, has been very successful, and we do not expect any additional surprises in terms of costs. The overrunning of the PFI is already funded within the trust accounts.
Thank you very much, Pippa. Can I come back, because I think I can now see Robin? Yep, so I'm going to come to Robin for your question about the community diagnostic.
Thank you, Chair. My whole system dropped just as you began public question. Let's be back. I would be grateful for some further enlightenment on the CDCs referred to in your report, page 24. Is there a paper we can look at explaining their development, how these areas of deprivation have been selected, whether the customers of the diagnostic centre will be restricted to those areas, or more generally, is there any suggestion of public-private cooperation, which seems to have occurred elsewhere when diagnostic centres success, and generally there be public engagement in the development of these facilities?
Thank you. I'll come to Tim first, and I'll come to Tim.
Thank you. So the papers are actually going to the local scrutiny committees. So the public papers with the detail in it is actually going to Brent's public scrutiny committee tonight, which I will be at there to represent it. So we can share that paper with you, it's not a problem, and the detail is worked up in terms of local boroughs' demand and deprivation. In terms of private providers, no, this is an NHS facility and will be run fully by the NHS. And in terms of referral routes that you've asked for, this is directly from GPs. So this is supposed to, and the whole benefit of this is it's preventing a referral from a GP to an acute trust consultant for a diagnostic to be done. This is directly from GPs to then undertake diagnostic tests for patients, which will speed up their clinical pathway right at the front of the pathway. So it's a really positive gain for our patients in North West London.
Thank you. Tim, did you want to add anything to that?
Just a couple of things. I mean, these are good questions. It's probably worth remembering this is a national programme based on Sir Mike Richards' report about, largely actually about how to get cancers diagnosed earlier. And so to bring the diagnostics as close to the patient and as quickly available. So it's been arranged in the context of a national programme. So there are many ways that you can skin a cat, and the way that's been chosen is to have these diagnostic hubs. We've chosen in North West London to try and really make sure that they are sited in areas of deprivation. And I guess in terms of your specific questions, Robin, I mean, the papers will be available, so you'll be able to look at them. There has been strategic lay partner involvement in terms of the planning to try and make sure that we do at least get some of the patient voice. And as you know, we're trying to expand the way that we get patient public involvement in all of these projects. But the other thing is that in terms of the question about demand, it's actually quite a difficult question. It's a more difficult question than it appears, because actually, if we were to try and measure current demand, you wouldn't actually then be making an inroad into what we need to do for the future, which of course is to go in and meet that unmet demand. So actually, it's better to use probably indices of deprivation overall, because that way you can then work out how you can get closer to the population that you ultimately need to address. But as Pippa said, these are completely NHS facilities.
Thank you very much, Tim. I can't see Brian having appeared, so if you do appear, Brian, wave at me and we'll come to your question. Otherwise, we will respond to it in writing on the website. But I do have a written question from Councillor Collymore. Diana wanted to ask a question about diabetes services.
Thank you, Chair. I hope you can hear me because the sound is very, very bad at our end. Could the board tell me what collaboration is being done to help people who are being discharged with diabetes? Because I heard transparent recording from one of the patients, and I thank the person, the director, who brought that to our attention. Can they please let us know if you're going to collaborate with local authorities, because we have Brentford Matters, who has been set up specifically to help people who are being discharged who have diabetes or who are not able to manage their diabetes. Is it possible for the board to explain that? Because I see that the quality, as I said, the patient's voice representing health inequality. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And my apologies if the sound is poor for the people who are listening in. You are absolutely crystal clear coming to us, so we will investigate why the sound quality is so poor for you, if it hasn't been in the past. So I'm sorry about that. who is the right person to pick this up? Julian, thank you.
No, thank you, and thank you very much for the questions. It is a really important area, and we've got increasing numbers of diabetic patients in our population across the country as well. So it's an important area. I think it's one that we need to take back, because it's one that we need to think about in terms of peer reviews, about how we take forward plans across the collaborative to help with our diabetic patients. I know that individual trusts, myself and Imperial, are leading some work around diabetes individually, but you're right about how we deal with that across the collaborative. But also on the ICS, and what we'll do is go back to the CRG for the ICS around diabetes as well, because I think it's important to understand the work that they're doing back in the community and linking into trust as well.
Thank you very much. Are there other questions? Yes, one at the back. We're going to need to get a microphone to you.
I want to ask questions to Seema.
Yeah, we need to get a microphone to you. Otherwise, the people who are listening will get.
Thank you very much. I have two questions. I think one for you, one for Tim. I'll start with Tim. You said we are making our organization better, and we are also more inclusive. Any disabled representative at the board of Imperial NHS Trust or the board in common? And how can you make the service for disabled patients better if they are not part of the decision-making process? Also, you said we are working with the development team better. I shared with you an email in which I detailed how we can build a cancer diagnostic facility for the trust without taking any money from the trust budget, by turning the human capital of the trust, the social capital of the trust, and intangible asset of the trust into life capital, and using that money to build a cancer diagnostic center. But my email had not been shared, although part of it was, or part of my strategy was used elsewhere. Why?
So, a couple of things. So, as I also said in my report, there is a lot of work still to do in our organisation to make it as good as it can be. We are making significant progress both with staff and I think also with patient groups to try and make sure that we do have voices represented. As you know, I know that you have had some interactions with our Strategic Lay Forum, and we're always very keen to get people onto the Strategic Lay Forum. We need them obviously to work within the processes that we have so that we can make sure that we get the patient voice properly included in the process that we have to use in the NHS. And that comes back to the second point, that we get a lot of suggestions, and I get a lot of suggestions from you and others about how we can do stuff. Some of that stuff is absolutely practical and we can use and we can put it into our normal NHS processes. And some of it is stuff that is less easy to sort out. The other issue, of course, is that we have to think carefully about what are the priorities for us, both as an individual trust and part of the collaborative, at any given point. At the moment, if I were to look at the priorities for us in terms of redevelopment, it has to be to get a new St Mary's Hospital.
The question you haven't asked, I say why?
Simply because it's not practical. It's not practical. But it's not practical.
The second is the representation at the board. I'm not talking about the lay forum. I'm talking about the board. I'm currently contributing the World Bank.
Yep.
And now there's everywhere, every organization, there has to be disabled representation at the board in order to improve the service that organization offer to the disabled people. So I'm talking about why disabled people cannot be at the board. Simple question.
So I will refer you to Peter and Matthew about representation at the board. I am very keen to expand the representation at an executive level, and I completely agree with you that we do not have enough representatives. We do have an increasing representative and increasingly active disability network in the organisation that has made some very substantial changes. At the moment, I absolutely agree it's largely for staff, but it is important to get staff from all backgrounds active in the organisation. We have made some quite important changes this year in relation to things like how we make sure that people who are working in the organisation with disabilities have access to reasonable adjustments to make sure that they can do their jobs as well as they can. So we've moved that to a central mechanism for funding. In relation to non-executive appointments, so the people who hold the executive to Matthew shares my enthusiasm for making sure that the board is as representative as possible. I can't answer the question about non-executive recruitment because it's not actually my responsibility.
I want to have one question to Matthew. I am struggling about, I'm very, you stopped me from asking questions while others were allowed in last board meeting that I attended. Furthermore, my input and image were deliberately removed from the video of the board in common of the common meeting of October 2022. Other than Imperial, do other CEO who were presently at the meeting agree with you what you have done and removing me from the appearing in the video of that board meeting?
Peter, can I ask you to take that question? That's an administrative question.
Thanks, Andy. That's it. As we previously discussed,
I want if the chair can answer.
I'll invite the chair. Just in terms of the process around the publication in the video to cut you out. The video stopped when the meeting ended.
No. It was in the middle of the meeting. I stood up. I wanted to ask a question. I was stopped. My image was completely. Why? That's for the chair.
Well, as we discussed in my firstly, the publication of the video is nothing to do with chair, and Peter explained to you when we met before that it wasn't. So there's not really any more. But you're here sitting at the microphone. I'm on camera at the moment, so I apologise.
I'm making myself feel vulnerable by asking such questions, but I think it will benefit other people. So the way I've been treated is understandable because nothing gets done without someone paying the price for it. I'm just asking why you removed me from the video. Why my input and image were removed from the video. Also, the previous last board meeting of the Imperial NHS Trust, I asked a question and none of that video was uploaded into the system. Why?
I'm sorry, you're going to take this to Peter and offline because
I think it is.
Could we? I mean, we have discussed this. Can I ask if somebody else wants to answer a question? But we're happy to take these conversations offline. But I think we've answered.
I think I deserve an answer. It's a simple thing.
And our answer is
that the responsible body will have uploaded the board meeting after the meeting, and that's what every trust does. Why the last board meeting of Imperial NHS Trust were not uploaded, and why for the last meeting that I attended the board committee, my image and question were removed from the video.
We have answered this before, Abdi Fatah, but for the benefit of the whole board, and this has been recorded. So the last Imperial meeting, as I explained to you, unfortunately due to a technical error, that video was not available. It wasn't a decision that we took not to publish it. It wasn't available.
You said the electric cut, and that's a cheap answer because if there is electric cut in a hospital like a trust, Imperial NHS Trust, a lot of people who were on life support machine would have died. A lot of operations would have been cancelled. That doesn't make sense. Simple question. Why? Why that board meeting were not uploaded was not uploaded to the system?
there's a danger we're going to prolong this for unduly out of factor. But I've answered why. So it was a technical error, and it was being videoed elsewhere. It wasn't actually on the hospital side. But the point is that there was a technical failure. That's why we didn't publish that video. And the previous meeting of this board, where it wasn't, the video was cut at the end of the.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Can I ask you to please come and take the microphone?
Thank you, Chair. Trevor Arnold, Partnerships Director, Senior Southerners, former Director of Oncology and Diagnostics at Southend. My question is regarding radiotherapy, radiosurgery in North West London. NHS England recently confirmed devolved commissioning of these specialist services to ICBs, transpiring in 2023. How confident does the APC feel that the ICB has the skills and capability to take this on, particularly given the likely increase in radiotherapy referral due to good local work on CDCs and earlier diagnosis?
I'm going to pass it on to someone else. Who would like to take this? Looks like Tim is sitting up. Yeah.
Thank you. So I guess what I'd say about the ICB is that we're part of it. So and I don't mean that to sound sanctimonious or facetious, but the acute units are part of the ICB. So I think it's a very fair question, and actually it is in terms of the specialty and others as well. The second thing I would say is we're also part of the Royal Marsden Cancer Alliance. So so how we work together in terms of planning those services goes through that network as well. So and Tim might want to say something in terms of the major provider of these services.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question. I think the current situation, I think, is that we're a situation where we're getting to the ceiling of where we are, what we can provide in terms of radiotherapy. And it is a concern to me at the moment that that we need to make sure that radiotherapy waits do not increase. Because I completely agree with you that if you get earlier detection of that will inevitably lead on to an increase in treatment pathways. And I think if you look across the whole of the NHS at the moment, I'm not sure that we have planned as effectively for the consequences of early diagnosis as we need to have done. I think that the ICB, I think in North West London, has both Royal Marsden Partners, as Leslie said, and Imperial, both of which actually, Royal Marsden itself and Imperial are large providers of cancer services. I think we will need to have considerable expansion in radiotherapy over the course of the next we are getting to the limits of providing in a timely fashion. But as Leslie says, I am confident that the ICB will have those conversations with the big providers to make sure that we get this right and we get the radiotherapy provision in the right place. But at the moment, do I feel absolutely assured that we've got a plan in place? No, I don't. And I think we have got quite a lot of work to do over the course of the next year or so to make sure that as the money comes into the sector in a devolved manner, we all take responsibility for making sure it's used appropriately.
Just for extra clarity, so you've quoted 2023, it's actually been pushed back a year. So it's 2024, we're expecting that now. Yeah, so we've got another year to work through this plan.
That's good.
Thank you very much. Two more questions. Sorry.
Definitely not intended as a trick question. And can I just say, good to see generally the move from competition to cooperation.
Thank you very much.
Lovely. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. We're going to do two more questions. Firstly, Brian is struggling with his technology. I'm going to come to Tim. You've got the question in writing. Can I ask you to outline the question and then answer it for come to Faye, who has a question about Chelsea and Westminster, about St Mary's, which will come to you as well, Tim, and then I will wrap us up.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Matthew. So Brian wrote to me actually, and I have replied in writing to Brian as well. So the question is around ophthalmology diagnostics. So he and I were at the Hammersmith Fulham Health and Adult Social Care Accountability and Award in Common, where he brought up the challenges facing ophthalmology in North West London. I talked about a strategic planning group, and he has now joined the work that we're doing across the collaborative around diagnostic hubs in North West London, and one of them at Willesden, which London North West will be running, has already had it approved, but he's concerned that there isn't a comprehensive strategic plan, as we have previously discussed. And he points out that the number of patients living with late stage AMD is expected to increase by 21% by 2032, and even with a large number of diagnostic hubs, 6 or 7, it's unlikely that they're sufficient to meet the predicted need. So he says that we need a strategic plan with patient voice and true co-production. Points out that Imperial College Healthcare has done a good work and continues to provide good standard care for thousands of patients. We're aware of the current work to improve facilities at the Western Eye. The need for a comprehensive strategic plan is both obvious and urgent. We believe the challenge of ambition of integration to make the most of every available resource. So, I mean, I largely, as I've replied to Brian, I largely agree with everything he said. I think that our clinicians, so the clinical reference group across North West London, led by Vivian Mensah from London North West and by Lauren Crawley, have put together a really good strategic plan. I think that we have had some helpful discussions with senior people in the integrated care board to try and make sure we don't get down the rabbit hole of commissioning a community service on the one hand and a secondary care service on the other that don't properly dovetail. I'm meeting actually next week with the ICB lead for the ophthalmology programme, along with our senior management people and even try and make sure that connection is lost. And the eagle-eyed who've looked at the ICB papers for this afternoon, because today will note that that when it went to the strategic commissioning group, they were keen that more work was done in the field of ophthalmology to make sure there was a proper plan. So I think we have got an opportunity now to try and get this right, and it's quite important we take it, and it will require quite a lot of work over the course of the next few months.
Thank you for that, Tim. Okay, I'm going to come to Faye, and there is in fact one more question in the audience from gentleman exactly the other side of Kevin to me. I'm going to come to Faye first online, but if you come here, sir. Faye.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much. I kind of put it into the chat box. My big concern for Westminster is that a lot of services are totally impacting Westminster in the sense that the services seem to be quietly moved to alongside hospitals, and it's ignoring a lot of the needs of the regular residents, the different diversity of cohort of residents within Westminster, the geography problems in getting across certain areas of Westminster to go to the various assigned sites. So if we're talking, for example, diagnostic and the ICPs, some of the venues are totally impractical for people with disabilities, elderly people. We keep harping about orthopedics. Certainly the facilities and some of the services appear to be draining quite rapidly. I'm relieved to hear that you're actually trying to cut down on aid systems at the expense of getting some proper longevity for the staff that should be paid and remunerated and actually appreciated for the work that they're putting in. But Imperial, there seems to be a two-tier system where you are favouring one area for the other. I was appalled the other day when I went into St. Mary's Hospital to find that there wasn't even a canteen, restaurant, coffee bar, but a vending machine. That is absolutely extraordinary. If we're going to as basic as that, what is happening to the other services at the current time? So I really would like to see more patient representatives in Imperial. I'm very involved. I'm very pleased to see Jim is here today because, and Hafsa with Merrill, because they really set a good example of keeping us informed of what's happening on the other side of Imperial. But seriously, St. Mary's used to be a wonderfully world-acclaimed hospital, and it appears to be at this current time drained of services. Did I hear correctly? You're moving now another scanner across to Mount Vernon. So what happens at St. Mary's? There is a huge cohort of residents, and we need to be looked after. The same provision and quality of service that Imperial deserves to provide for us. The urgent care centre being run on locums is not what I want to hear about. We have seen the failures of the urgent care centre at St. Mary's. We have seen the problems arising from the urgent care centre since the changes have taken place. So I'm imploring to Imperial to please start taking St. Mary's and the residents and the provision of services that used to be there and bring it back to the residents, and that we truly are collaboratively included, involved and provided for. Thank you.
Right, there's quite a lot in there. Not all of it I would quite agree with, I'm afraid. So I have a huge commitment to St. Mary's. I've been a consultant at St. Mary's since 2001, and I still do my clinic at St. Mary's every Friday afternoon. We haven't actually been moving, either by design or default, loads and loads of services off the St. Mary's campus. And in terms of quality, St. Mary's remains the busiest major trauma centre in London, and has the trauma network that sits around that has some of the best outcome results in the entire country for people who have major trauma. You've highlighted a few specific issues. I'm afraid to say the canteen at St. Mary's was closed long before I became the chief executive, and actually at the moment, and Michelle may want to talk about this in a short while, we are working up a plan to get rid of the current facilities and to replace what the food and beverage offering is with something much more substantial, and to basically to create a flagship, for want of a better word, space for staff at St. Mary's, because as you know, the big issue with St. Mary's is it's a very, very tight site in terms of space. It's landlocked, and we have a very, very large amount of activity going on in a space where we simply can't expand.
But you don't only have vending machines. You do have.
No, absolutely. We absolutely have facilities. I mean, when you get to sort of midnight, then I think the offer is not as good as I would like it to be, and we are actively looking at what the offer can be. But you're absolutely right. At the moment, we have a cafeteria just inside the entrance of St. Mary's. Where I would completely agree with you is that the buildings are absolutely not fit for the delivery of 21st century healthcare. And that is a point I am making repeatedly and strongly to pretty much anybody who will listen, but certainly to both our locally elected representatives, our MPs, the top of the NHS, and there's a general recognition that it needs to be rebuilt. And of course, the plans that we have to rebuild it will deliver, hopefully, a hospital that has an increase in over 200 beds on the number of beds that we have currently on the site. So we are absolutely committed to the provision of high quality healthcare at Mary's. We have a full suite of outpatient services, and we have all the emergency. Some services have in the past moved around, but we've always been through process. Two last points. The MRI scanner that is moving to Mount Vernon has not moved to St. Mary's, and has not moved actually from any of the Imperial sites, so you still have exactly the same number of MRI scanners, and I had an MRI myself at St. Mary's not so long ago. There was one other thing which I've now completely forgotten, which is very frustrating. I wonder, Michelle, it was the strategic labour forum. So we have a very active mechanism for people to get involved with the way that we plan services. And I'll just go briefly to Michelle to talk about that. And
can we not, because you need to go to another board meeting, and I want to take one last question from the public. So we'll follow that up directly.
Okay,
take this one last executive to walk out. Please.
Hello there, thank you very much. I'm Michael Taylor from HBS UK. Thank you, Chairman. My question is related to digital innovation and technology. All the trusts represented here have teams endeavouring to improve throughput, the increased service delivery both in the community and their sites with backlogs in our patients and everything else. I was wondering, within the ICB, there's obviously is this reported on? So, you know, the impact of doing whatever is the throughput by 2,000 patients in the last month, or, you know, we've saved £150,000 because we've changed the pathway. Does that sort of come out in different ways? Because you're all trying to do more with less, one way or another, whether it's resources or whether it's money. But I think digital, I'm not saying it's the only solution because it isn't, but it is part of the solution to try and get us out of the area that we're in today.
Just going to come to you for a brief answer, because I actually think this is probably a subject for a future board proper discussion.
So the direct answer is not a lot of information yet. So we have a strategy a strategy that's being developed for the acute provider collective, a digital strategy, which is that is just about to be published. It's part of the overarching strategy of the ICB. It is a number of streams that, in fact, in our infrastructure papers today, we talked a lot about, if you like, the chunks of work we're doing around the hardware, if you like. When we're all on Cerner, there'll be a lot of opportunities for us to look at what more we can do. There's also a piece of work we're doing around how we use technology to manage our waiting lists. And actually, we're very innovative in that field. We're doing some work with the national team, and that will start. We will start to be able to report that by using digital, we've made significant differences. We do also have very limited examples of where, for instance, in our workforce pathways, we use digital to help with recruitment, and where that's improved our turnaround time for recruiting to post and those sorts of things. So it's limited, but absolutely good.
Right. Thank you very much. I've got a bit carried away with the excitement. We have a whole private section of the board meeting still to go, but so I apologise for that. But if I close the public part of the board meeting, thank the people who joined us, thank the questioners for excellent questions and the people who answered them, and let's take a couple of minutes and come back before we come back into the private meeting. Thank you very much indeed.